Snow gently falls beneath a star-filled night sky, accompanied by the thought that place and origin do not define a true light. Even trapped in the dark, forgotten squalor of a slum, one's value is never diminished. Beneath the piled debris and rotting wagon wheels, something buried deep suddenly begins to rattle. Bursting through the trash with a sharp whoosh, a bruised hand reaches out toward the cold sky. Struggling up from the filthy rubble, a young blonde boy clutches his sword, driven by an unyielding desire to shine. His face is caked in dirt, but his bright blue eyes blaze with pure determination as long as light remains in his heart. Gripping his blade tightly, a radiant aura begins to erupt around his battle-worn body. For anyone who holds onto that inner spark, even in the darkest place, is truly a star. Back in the present, snowy town streets light up outside a cozy building where a sword hangs mounted on the wall. A beautifully crafted long sword gleams brightly under a warm, golden light. Vlad gazes intently at the weapon, his piercing blue eyes reflected in its pristine steel. Vlad smiles softly to himself, admitting that he could stare at a fine blade forever without growing tired. As he drifts into a daze, a familiar voice calls out to scold him for getting distracted once again. It's Gemina, standing in the cold with her arms crossed and her red hair catching the winter light. Annoyed by his daydreaming, Gemina confronts Vlad about how absent-minded he's been acting lately. Vlad defends himself, chuckling that admiring swords is one of the few real pleasures he gets to enjoy in life. Unimpressed, Gemina warns him that constantly stopping to stare blankly into space is starting to make the locals talk. When Vlad asks what they could possibly be saying, Gemina glances around nervously to check if anyone is listening. She leans in close and whispers if he's still hearing that strange voice whenever he looks at anything shaped like a sword. Vlad falls silent, prompting Gemina to sigh heavily and tease that he must have committed awful deeds in a past life. She reminds him how absurd it was for him to get struck by lightning completely out of nowhere. What made it even stranger was that it wasn't ordinary lightning, but ominous black lightning. Gemina urges him to stay inside, explaining that the town's new bishop is extremely sensitive about bad omens. Since the bishop formerly worked for the Inquisition, even a hint of an evil omen could get Vlad burned at the stake. Vlad brushes her fears off as an overreaction, leaving Gemina fuming with frustration over his lack of concern. Gemina warns Vlad that many people witnessed him getting struck by lightning, cautioning him that rumors are already spreading, and he risks being dragged away and interrogated by the church. Vlad casually brushes off her concern, claiming nobody will arrest him just for admiring a weapon, which only frustrates Gemina as she asks why he doesn't just buy it on credit. When Vlad explains that the blade is far too expensive, Gemina scoffs at the idea of a costly weapon from a back-alley shop and offers to buy it for him. With a completely serious expression, Vlad turns around and reveals the outrageous price tag of 5 gold coins. Gemina stares back at him in utter disbelief, convinced he must be pulling her leg. She gasps at such an exorbitant price for a piece of scrap metal, while Vlad agrees that 5 gold is enough to feed a person for an entire year. Before they can say another word, an enraged shout booms from inside the shop, furious that anyone would dare mock his craftsmanship. The muscular old blacksmith comes charging out with a heavy hammer in hand, bellowing at the young brats to get lost. Fuming with anger, he shouts that poor slum dwellers like them do not even deserve to gaze upon a blade of such quality. Rather than backing down, Gemina brazenly talks back, asking who else would buy it in the slums and cheekily asking if the old man has gone senile. The sudden insult stuns the blacksmith, leaving him completely flabbergasted by her audacity. Clenching his fists in a rage, the old man roars back, offended that a brat would dare speak to him with such disrespect. Unbothered by his fury, Gemina continues to mock him, questioning why he would forge a sword where no knights exist. Pushed beyond his patience, the blacksmith yells at them to leave and tells Gemina to run back to her shop and wash dishes. Gemina immediately flies into a rage over being called a loser, but Vlad gently pats her head to keep her from attacking the old man. Vlad apologizes to the shopkeeper and pulls the still protesting Gemina away before the situation escalates further. As the duo leaves into the night, the blacksmith curses under his breath, bitter that the girl he once saved from starving repays him with insults. He remembers the freezing winter when he shared his food with Vlad and Gemina as they huddled together in the snow. Shaking off the past with a frustrated groan, the old man turns back toward his workshop. However, as he prepares to step inside, something on the ground catches his attention. He gazes down at deep footprints pressed an inch into the mud, realizing Vlad had been standing in that exact spot for a long time. He sighs to himself, thinking the boy should focus on day-to-day survival rather than obsessing over a sword. Lifting the weapon from its display, He reflects on how dangerous it is for a kid from the slums to nurse grand ambitions that will only end in disappointment. Yet, he gazes solemnly at the blade, determined to sell his final masterpiece only to someone capable of escaping these wretched slums. Admiring the bright gleam of the steel, the old blacksmith quietly realizes that Vlad actually shares a striking resemblance to the sword. Even amidst the deep filth and decay of these wretched slums, Vlad somehow continues to stand out, carrying a bright radiance that refuses to be dimmed. Overlooking the land stands the main trading hub of the northern regions, known as the Lighthouse of the North and ruled by the powerful Vaizid family. This grand and prosperous settlement is known as Skowara. Yet, beneath all of its high radiance and splendor, dark shadows are always bound to fester hidden from view. That shadow is none other than the slums, a dumping ground for everything filthy and rejected. Inside a lively local establishment, patrons drink, flirt, and fill the room with noisy chatter. Upstairs, a massive brute grabs a terrified woman by her hair, roaring that she tried to scam him. Ignoring her desperate cries, the mercenary violently drags her down the wooden stairs. He boasts about his 20 years as a hardened mercenary, raging that no one will cheat him and get away with it. Carrying a box of candles, Vlad walks into the room and dryly remarks that there is never a dull moment. Noticing Vlad, the brute aggressively points at him, commanding the young candlekeeper to fetch the madam. Unfazed, Vlad coldly informs him that spending time with the madam requires gold, not silver. Outraged by the cost, the brute screams in disbelief before hurling a vile insult at Vlad's mother. At those words, Vlad's icy blue eyes narrow into a sharp and deadly glare. The mercenary continues shouting, claiming the timekeeping candles are a fraud because his burned out almost instantly. Vlad sighs in exasperation, mocking the man for expecting too much from a cheap 5-minute candle and telling him to go home to his wife. The brute's face contorts with explosive fury as veins pop across his forehead. Remaining completely composed, Vlad dismisses the fuss and decides to prove the candle's duration himself. Pulling a candle from his box, Vlad points to a grandfather clock nearby and proposes they measure the burn time right now. With a cool smirk, he adds that if it doesn't last 5 minutes, the man can take his frustration out on the woman. Still enraged and suspicious, the mercenary sneers, asking why he should trust a bunch of swindlers. Suddenly, a chilling blue aura flares around Vlad's eyes as he coldly presses the man to take the deal. He delivers a chilling threat, promising that if the candle does last 5 minutes, he will beat the mercenary within an inch of his life. Crushed by Vlad's intense bloodlust, the massive mercenary shudders in utter terror, his aggression instantly evaporating. Paralyzed by sheer terror, the mercenary wonders in horror how a mere kid could possess such deathly, murderous eyes. With complete composure, Vlad strikes a match. He lights the candle and sets it on the floor, declaring that it is time to reveal who the true swindler is. As time begins to tick away, cold sweat pours down the mercenary's face as anxiety gnaws at him. Vlad waits silently with his wooden rod, while the mercenary desperately clings to his hostage. Below, on the main floor, the tavern patrons watch the tense standoff in dead silence. Vlad glares back with cold, impassive eyes, completely unbothered by the passing seconds. Suddenly, the candle flame fizzles out early, catching the thug completely off guard. In a panic, the mercenary snaps his head around toward the clock on the wall. Realizing he lost track of time, he tries to recall when the 5 minutes actually started. Before he can think, a polite voice calls out to him. With terrifying speed, Vlad strikes him straight across the face with his wooden staff. The brutal hit knocks the thug backward, forcing him to release the woman as he groans in pain. Looking down with a bloody glare, Vlad coldly declares that his 5 minutes are up. Without giving him a moment to recover, Vlad winds up a powerful kick. He slams his boot straight into the thug's ribs, sending the massive man flying backward with a scream. The heavy brute crashes violently onto the wooden floor near the door. Vlad calmly closes the door to seal them inside, leaving the mercenary clutching his face in utter shock. Glaring at his trembling target, Vlad ominously tells him to say his prayers. Reduced to a terrified mess, the mercenary covers his bleeding nose and begs him to wait. Ignoring his pleas, Vlad viciously beats him with the staff, calling him out as the real liar. He mockingly asks how a true mercenary of 20 years could have developed such a lazy, fat belly. Swinging relentlessly in anger, Vlad responds to the thug's earlier threat, revealing he doesn't even have a mother. The sounds of brutal beatings and painful groans echo outside the tavern into the night. By the next morning, bright sunlight covers the city, bringing a quiet end to the chaotic night. Over breakfast, the young man slices into a sausage, remarking that someone must have tampered with the candles since they didn't even last 5 minutes. Leaning forward with a serious expression, he asks if his companion truly understands the gravity of the situation. As the burly Jorge quietly munches on his meal, the boy stresses that someone has directly sabotaged their primary source of income. Hearing this, the madam furiously screams out in rage, demanding to know who dared touch their sacred rose candles. Looking over his shoulder, the blonde youth declares that they will have to track down whoever is responsible. When he questions how they could possibly identify the culprit, the woman behind the counter casually announces that she already knows. Caught completely off guard, he turns toward her in shock and demands to know who it was. Striking an innocent, playful pose, Marcella, the madam of the smiling rose, happily confesses that she was the one who tampered with them. She cheerfully explains that her plan was simply to exploit the drunken patrons and squeeze a little extra coin out of them. Left entirely speechless, both men can only sit in dead silence before the shamelessly beaming madam. Walking down the creaking wooden stairs, the blonde boy sighs in regret, realizing he beat up an innocent man for nothing. Resigning himself to the situation, he accepts that whatever the madam chooses to do is beyond his control. At the bottom of the stairs, a smug man greets him, mentioning that he heard about the massive brawl from the previous day. Backed by his crew of thugs, the man casually thanks him for handling the trouble while he had stepped out. Draping an arm over the youth's shoulder, he brings up the tip money collected from selling candles, claiming everyone is running short on cash. The young man responds with a piercing, lethal glare, demanding to know what Bari thinks he is doing. Throwing his hands up in mock surrender, Bari tells him to take it easy and tone down the terrifying look. Leaning in close with a greasy grin, Bari clarifies that he isn't demanding a handout, but rather proposing a fair trade. With an outstretched hand, Bari insists that if the boy hands over his spare change, he will receive something worthwhile in return. He begins describing an incompetent, clumsy little pickpocket who had recently been caught. Grabbing a bruised and battered child by the hair, Bari yanks him upward and asks if he recognizes the boy. Holding the beaten child captive on the floor, Bari offers to hand him over for just 40 pieces of silver, calling it a bargain. Looking down at the captive, the blonde youth coldly questions the current condition of the boy's fingers and ankles. Bari smirks and gestures dismissively, assuring him they only roughed him up a little, and that the kid remains perfectly intact and strong. Letting out a deep, disgusted sigh, the young man mutters a bitter curse under his breath. Bari drops a heavy pouch onto the counter with a clink, cheering that he knew Vlad could be counted on. Hearing the harsh warning, the bruised kid flinches as Vlad coldly tells the thugs to just kill the boy next time instead of calling him. The thug feigns offense at the suggestion, claiming they are honest workers rather than murderers, while Vlad silently dismisses them as a bunch of lying cheats. Gloating among themselves, the thugs whisper about how easily Vlad took the deal, noting there is a reason he held all the street kids under his thumb. Vlad casts a stern glance toward Ned, calling out the young boy's name. Terribly shaken and bruised, Ned stammers out an apology, explaining that he tried his best to slip away from them. Staring back impassively, Vlad simply asks the terrified kid if any of his bones are broken. Clutching his neck nervously, the young boy whimpers that he isn't broken anywhere. Without missing a beat, Vlad harshly orders him to get out of his sight before he decides to crush him himself. Relieved that Vlad saved him despite his cold demeanor, Ned scrambles to his feet and offers a quiet thank you as Vlad turns away. Rubbing his aching neck, Vlad lets out an exhausted sigh, wondering when he will ever manage to save up 5 gold coins. The scene shifts to the bustling harbor of Scoera, where ships sway under the bright sky. As a pen scribbles across parchment, a voice notes that the young street kid was actually extremely fortunate. Inside his office, Harvin, a clerk working for Captain Hoover, remarks that pickpockets usually suffer a far grimmer fate. A harrowing memory surfaces of children weeping around a bloodied victim whose fingers were chopped off and ankle tendons severed. Harvin remembers how the ruthless bishop wanted to make a gruesome public example out of him last time. Changing the subject, Harvin mentions hearing rumors about someone tampering with the candles at the Smiling Rose, surprising Vlad with how fast word spreads. From across his desk, Harvin explains that townspeople are stunned, believing Marcella would never do such a thing. Vlad agrees, pointing out that Jorge was already aware of the situation and wouldn't stir up trouble without a reason. Leaning forward intently, Harvin reasons that if Jorge went out of his way to do this, he must have had an extremely good motive. Vlad narrows his eyes and asks what kind of reason could drive such a move. Harvin gravely answers that it almost certainly stems from an urgent need for money. Fixing Vlad with a serious glare, Harvin warns him to stay cautious, explaining that crime families only hoard cash so suddenly for one reason. Visions of violent chaos arise as rival gang members clash brutally with blades and axes in an all-out turf war. A stark text reveals that 5 powerful bosses hold absolute dominion over the slums of Scoera. First is Jorge, known as the Horse Guard, standing resolute with his hands resting calmly on the hilt of a massive sword. Then comes Black Bear, the pig butcher, leaning forward menacingly with a heavy cleaver dripping with blood. Next is Dice, the gambler, flicking glowing dice into the air with a sinister, twisted grin. Beside him is Captain Hoover, the whaler, dangerously swinging his heavy harpoon amidst crashing ocean waves. And lastly, a looming shadow emerges as gold coins rain down around a mysterious, glowing figure, revealing One-Armed Jack, known far and wide as the Penny Pincher, proudly displaying his lethal iron hook. The darkest, most dangerous forces in life rarely give any warning before they strike. Instead, they creep up silently from the shadows when people least expect it. And right now, that looming danger fills a small shop packed tightly with armed, ruthless men. A harsh voice breaks the heavy atmosphere, calling out to the young boy sitting quietly at the counter. One-Armed Jack steps forward with a smug sneer, raising his hook hand as he demands to know where the boss is. Unfazed by the terrifying gang leader, the young clerk looks up with icy, glowing blue eyes. Because in a place like this, violent accidents tend to happen without a single moment of warning, and sudden destruction comes when people are completely unprepared. Looking at the gang leader before him, the boy inwardly wonders why a boss like the Penny Pincher has personally shown up. He narrows his eyes in deep thought, questioning if the rival factions are truly gearing up for an all-out turf war. Before he can answer, Jack's hot-headed subordinate steps in and aggressively barks at him for keeping quiet. The young boy merely glares back, his expression completely cool and unfazed by the shouting. He nonchalantly replies that he has no idea where the owner is, reminding them that he is just a simple candle salesman. Outraged by the boy's blunt response, the angry thug gnashes his teeth at such blatant disrespect toward his boss. With a sudden burst of rage, the thug smashes his fist down on the counter, shattering the wooden crate into pieces. Dozens of white candles burst into the air as the angry thug roars at the boy to go fetch his boss immediately. The candles tumble messily across the wooden floor in a shower of broken wooden splinters. A heavy, suffocating silence instantly falls over the crowded tavern as everyone stops to stare at the destruction. Watching the tense encounter from the side, the local women sweat nervously, terrified of the bloody chaos about to unfold. Drool spills from a stunned patron's mouth while a young red-haired girl covers her face in sheer shock. A calm, dismissive voice sighs at the senseless destruction unfolding around them. Kneeling casually amidst the wreckage, the blonde boy complains about his ruined candles ruining today's sales. Veins bulge from the Scarface thug's neck as he fumes in fury at the boy's complete lack of fear. Reaching right beside the thug's boot to gather the remnants, the boy politely asks him to pardon him. The thug glances down with a perplexed and irritated glare, completely baffled. Looking up with chilling blue eyes, the boy cold-bloodedly commands him to step aside. Blood rushes to the thug's face as he explodes in blind rage at being ordered around. Screaming in fury, the thug launches a heavy kick straight toward the crouching boy. For the young protagonist, every duel is merely a microcosm of battlefield warfare. With effortless grace, the boy dodges the incoming strike with room to spare. To win, one must thoroughly analyze the environment and devise a flawless strategy. He swiftly lunges forward, aiming his wooden pole directly at his enemy's weak spot. The heavy wooden stick strikes the thug with brutal, unyielding precision. The thug grunts out in pain and stumbles backward as the boy glides cleanly past him. With glowing blue eyes, the boy prepares to execute his final decisive strike. He delivers a crushing blow across the thug's face, securing an absolute and swift victory. The watching women gasp in stunned disbelief at how effortlessly the young boy neutralized his opponent. Surrounding thugs and onlookers stare in utter silence, horrified by what just happened before their eyes. The burly bearded leader glares intensely, realizing this boy is far from ordinary. Staring down the room with ice-cold eyes, the boy remembers the absolute iron rule of the slums. Standing tall over the fallen, he embodies the truth that victors reign supreme over all, while the defeated lie crushed at their feet, forced to submit to absolute strength. Enraged by their comrades' defeat, two thugs charge forward with axes raised to crush the disrespectful kid. Before the bloody assault can land, a commanding voice echoes through the room, ordering everyone to halt. Hearing the sudden command to halt, the enraged thugs instantly freeze, halting their brutal strike. The leader with a hook prosthetic taps his iron claw against his hand, sarcastically apologizing for not clapping louder while praising the boy's nerve. Unfazed by the dangerous pirate, the blonde boy calmly responds that he has no prejudice against disabled individuals. Amused by the kid's fearless backtalk, the hook-handed leader bursts into a roaring laugh. Looming menacingly over the boy with a sinister red glow in his eye, he warns that they will meet again soon. When the man tries to recall a former street kid he recruited, the boy dryly suggests that forgotten servant is likely dead. Suddenly, the armored tavern boss steps forward, calling out the pirate as Penny Pincher and asking why he's paid a visit. Flanked by his own men, the boss casually remarks that he would have prepared a meal had he known Penny Pincher was coming. He strides forward with unwavering confidence, confronting the rowdy intruders in the tavern lobby. Penny Pincher grins mockingly, questioning since when their relationship was friendly enough to share a meal. Noting the large crowd of followers, the tavern boss invites Penny Pincher upstairs to handle their business privately. Stretching lazily, Penny Pincher turns down the food but asks if there is anything strong to drink. With an intense look in his eye, the boss promises that Marcella will take excellent care of all his needs. Smirking at the offer, Penny Pincher agrees to go upstairs and have a taste of their finest liquor. The gang follows the tavern boss upstairs, leaving the ground floor to finally calm down after the confrontation. Left alone in the quiet lobby, the blonde boy lets out a heavy sigh of relief after narrowly escaping a violent clash. Looking down at a crate filled with smashed candles, he laments the wasted goods left behind from the chaos. Suddenly, a voice breaks the silence as someone calls out to him from across the room. Penny Pincher approaches him again, mentioning that the boss spoke highly of his talents and praising his own eye for value. Raising his metal hook, Penny Pincher directly offers the boy a position in his crew if he ever wants to quit candle work. The boy scratches his neck and declines, explaining his boss feeds and pays him, which only makes Penny Pincher laugh and offer even more. Flipping a shiny coin into the air, Penny Pincher tosses it over as payment for the destroyed candles. Catching the heavy coin, the boy's eyes widen as he realizes it is made of pure gold. Staring at the fortune in his palm, the boy honestly points out that a gold coin is far too much for a crate of ruined wax. Penny Pincher smirks, declaring that plenty more wealth awaits him if he ever decides to join the Penny Pincher's ranks. As One-Armed Jack and his men walk away shouting their thanks for the meal, they bid a cheerful farewell to Jorge. Watching them depart, Vlad notes how satisfied Jack looks, assuming their meeting went smoothly. Suddenly, a red-haired girl calls out from the upper balcony, catching Vlad by surprise. Gesturing behind her, she informs Vlad that Jorge wants to speak with him immediately. Vlad walks over to the bar counter where Jorge sits waiting for him in the quiet tavern. Standing silently in front of his mentor, Vlad waits to hear what he has to say. Jorge presents him with a sharp, ornate dagger, explaining that while he planned to give it to him later, current events demand he have it now. With a stern look, Jorge instructs the boy to keep the blade on him at all times. Vlad listens intently, his gaze sharpening as he senses the gravity of the situation. Reflecting on recent events, Jorge recalls how the tense atmosphere at the brothel was an early warning sign of trouble. Around the tavern, the rest of the crew sits in grim silence, weighed down by the rising tension. In reality, the critical talk between Jorge and One-Armed Jack had actually ended in complete disaster. Jorge tells Vlad that he will no longer be selling candles, prompting Vlad to wonder if he'll be moved to collecting fees or patrolling. Stroking his beard, Jorge reveals troubling intelligence that Jack is bringing in a dangerous outsider, a former knight turned mercenary. Vlad looks back at him, asking if this incoming mercenary is a warrior just like Jorge. Jorge grimly confirms his suspicion, admitting the rival knight is indeed as formidable as he is. While One-Armed Jack commands a massive horde of street thugs, they are harmless sheep against a former knight like Jorge, who can single-handedly dominate ordinary fighters like a wolf. However, if Jack secures a former knight to fight for him, the balance of power will instantly be thrown off. Looking at Vlad from above the counter, Jorge admits they are at a severe disadvantage and declares that he needs Vlad's help, leaving the boy stunned. As Vlad registers the news, Jorge informs him that his first real mission will be coming up very soon. Meanwhile, narration reveals the story of Harvin, a man who suffered severed fingers and ankle tendons, leaving him unable to walk properly. Clever by nature, Harvin taught himself to read, write, and handle numbers, earning a role as a clerk for Captain Hoover despite his physical limitations. Seeing Harvin's resilience taught Vlad that relentless dedication to learning can create opportunities, regardless of one's circumstances. Inspired by these thoughts, Vlad continues swinging his wooden stick, determined to elevate his position in life. Suddenly, an eerie voice calls out to him inside his head, catching him completely off guard. The mysterious entity gives him unsolicited advice, telling him to keep his elbows closer to his body when he swings. Vlad curses under his breath, thoroughly annoyed that this strange intrusion happens every single time he swings a weapon. Ever since he was struck by black lightning a month ago, he has been haunted by this persistent voice in his mind. Whenever he picks up anything resembling a blade, the demon's whispers begin nagging at his form. Irritated, Vlad mutters to himself that he should probably buy holy water instead of focusing on swordplay. Shaking his head to clear his mind, he resolves to ignore the entity entirely and focus on his training. Closing his eyes, Vlad takes a deep breath and prepares to put everything he has into his final strike. His eyes snap open, blazing with intense determination as he focuses all his strength. Right at the critical moment, the voice screams in his head once more, commanding him to tuck in his elbows. Startled by the sudden yell, Vlad flinches and reflexively adjusts his arms at the top of his motion. With an explosive force, he brings the stick down, tearing through the air with incredible speed. Catching his breath, Vlad stares down at his hands, completely stunned by how different that swing felt. He realizes that while his previous attempts were mere swings, this strike felt as though it created something extraordinary. A brilliant blue energy pulses around him, signaling a massive breakthrough in his skill. Without realizing it, Vlad had just successfully executed a true sword art. A vision of a majestic swordmaster holding a glowing blade briefly flashes through his mind. Baffled and unnerved, Vlad wonders what kind of terrifying presence is truly residing inside his consciousness. Meanwhile, under the full moon in a freezing mountain pass, a quiet night settles over the snow. A hand carefully wipes fresh blood off a sharp blade using a rag, as the wielder laments his aging body. The battle-worn, white-haired veteran shivers slightly, feeling the bitter winter wind cut straight to his bones. He suddenly glances back into the dark woods upon hearing unnatural bird calls echoing around him. With a knowing smirk, he acknowledges the decent bird imitation, wondering if his pursuers are foolish or mocking him. Crunching through the deep snow, the old warrior calmly continues on his way into the dark forest. Stangar calls out into the freezing woods, telling the person mimicking bird calls to stop because he has finally arrived. A voice echoes through the silent, snow-covered forest, asking if he is indeed Stangar. Confirming his identity, the old warrior recognizes the young figure emerging from the trees as Vlad. Observing the boy, Stangar notes that despite coming from the slums, his striking blonde hair and bright blue eyes are unusual, to the point where anyone could easily mistake him for a member of nobility. Without wasting time on pleasantries, Vlad hands over a sealed letter sent directly from his boss. Reading the contents, Stangar learns that a rival family hired a former knight as a mercenary, making it clear why his help was needed. Turning back around, Vlad offers to lead the path, estimating they will reach their destination in 2 nights. Stangar silently watches the boy walk ahead into the dark, snow-laden woods. Sighing deeply, the old warrior doubts whether following someone so foolish is a good idea. When Vlad insists he is smart enough to guide him, Stangar bluntly replies that he doesn't seem like it at all. Grinning mockingly, Stangar asks how smart someone can be when they mimic a summer bird's call in the middle of winter, catching Vlad off guard. Looming over him with a menacing aura, the old knight sternly warns that he will execute the boy on the spot if he tries to lead him astray. Despite the terrifying threat, Vlad's calm blue eye doesn't show even a flicker of fear. Turning away indifferently, Vlad urges him to just follow along, mentioning he doesn't want to mess up his very first mission either. Stangar is thoroughly baffled internally, astonished that his scariest expression didn't cause the kid to flinch whatsoever. An amused smirk creeps onto the old warrior's face as his impression of the boy changes. Following Vlad through the winter night, Stangar reflects on the situation, realizing why Jorge took such a liking to him. In his mind, he acknowledges that this young boy is truly a diamond in the rough. Later that night, the duo sets up camp inside a cave, keeping warm beside a crackling fire. As the flames burn, Vlad repeatedly glances over at the seasoned warrior. Noticing the boy staring at him and his long sword, Stangar adjusts his posture. Feeling watched, the old knight directly asks Vlad if he has never seen a retired knight before. After Vlad confesses he has never seen one up close, Stangar chuckles, remarking that the boy clearly hasn't seen much of the world yet. Curious about his background, Stangar inquires where he is from, prompting Vlad to reply that he comes from Dakia. Learning Vlad is from Dakia, Vlad chuckles that the place is way out in the middle of nowhere, leaving Stangar visibly annoyed. Gripping his sword hilt tightly, Stangar threatens that he almost wishes Vlad would get them lost just so he'd have an excuse to cut him down. Unbothered by the threat, Vlad pulls out a batch of freshly prepared meat, jokingly asking if high and mighty knights lack a sense of humor. Spotting the appetizing meat, Stanger's stern demeanor softens as he assumes some of those tasty rations are intended for him. However, Vlad bluntly shuts him down, stating he didn't bring any for him and asking if he didn't pack his own food. Looking miserable, Stangar holds up a pathetic, rock-hard piece of stale jerky and reluctantly admits he technically does. To make matters worse, Vlad's succulent meat skewers begin sizzling enticingly directly over the crackling campfire. The irresistible aroma instantly makes Stangar drool, staring in sheer envy while clutching his sad, dry ration. Unable to resist the temptation, Stangar clears his throat across the fire and awkwardly asks if Vlad has any questions for a seasoned warrior. He proposes a trade, offering to answer one valuable question for every skewer of juicy meat Vlad hands over. Instead of taking the bait, Vlad silently takes a big bite of his meat, munching away while staring back with a deadpan expression. Vlad dryly tells him to just ask outright if he wants food, but Stangar angrily snaps back that a true knight has his pride. Crossing his arms firmly, the older knight insists that a man of honor only receives goods in exchange for fair compensation. When Vlad reminds him that he is retired, Stangar starts defending his lifelong code, only to be abruptly cut off as Vlad demands his name. After giving his name and age of 42, Stangar fumes at the kid for shamelessly rapid-firing questions without paying up. Ignoring the complaints, Vlad gets straight to the core of his curiosity and asks if Stangar knows how to manifest aura. Stangar chuckles amusedly, commenting on how little the young boy actually understands about the world beyond his rural home. He clarifies that not every knight can wield aura, and applying it in a real life-or-death battle is an entirely different level of mastery. Vlad cuts through the explanation and directly asks if Stangar can do it himself, prompting a confident smirk from the veteran. Noticing that subtle smirk, Vlad's eyes widen as he realizes the old knight might actually possess the rare ability. Desperate to see it, Vlad instantly holds up both hands full of juicy meat skewers, offering them all up as payment. Stangar glares down at the massive pile of delicious food, his resolve visibly crumbling under the offer. Vlad stares back intently with glowing blue eyes, eagerly waiting for the former knight to reveal his secrets. Reaching down to grab his sword hilt, Stangar reiterates his strict rule about fair trades before drawing his shining blade, rationalizing that even honorable knights can make exceptions after days of eating dry jerky. A mix of anticipation and disbelief washes over the young boy as his heart races, wondering if the knight is actually about to display his aura. Stangar takes a firm stance, holding his long sword upright before him in a solemn guard posture. Closing his left eye, the veteran swordmaster narrows his focus completely. Surprised by the strange technique, the boy openly asks why he chose to shut one eye. Stangar explains that to unleash his power, he must invoke the world residing within the deep recesses of his soul. Instructing the kid to watch closely, blue energy begins to crackle and stream from Stangar's eye. He declares this radiant light to be the true essence of knighthood as magical energy engulfs his blade. In a sudden jolt, his right eye flares with intense precision, locking onto his spiritual force. The blinding brilliance forces the boy to quickly shield his eyes with his arm. A magnificent sphere of raw aura blazes brightly, casting a radiant glow over everything. Enveloped in surging blue energy, Stangar wields his aura-infused blade with majestic power. Meanwhile, beneath the dark night sky, the silent fortress town slumbers peacefully. Back in the shadowy alleys, Stangar complains about feeling like a beggar, but the boy points out that looking grimy helps them avoid unwanted attention. Stangar groans that it goes beyond appearance, bemoaning how humiliating it is for a dignified knight to be so filthy. The boy firmly reminds him that stealth is necessary and they cannot simply walk through the front gate. Promising to prepare a warm bath once they reach their destination, the boy urges him to keep moving. Moving stealthily, the duo walks down the dark, deserted cobblestone pathway. Stangar voices his unease over the quiet streets, though the boy rationally attributes it to the late hour. Suddenly, both of them come to an abrupt halt as something catches their attention. Narrowing his eyes, Stangar cautiously asks if this disturbing sight is normal around here. Sweating nervously, the boy grimly replies that it is definitely not. Surveying the grisly scene of bloodied bodies strewn across the ground, Stangar realizes a battle has already taken place. The boy proposes splitting up so Stangar can use a secret family entrance, causing Stangar to ask about his plan. Intending to act as a distraction, the boy dashes away toward the front entrance. Stangar is left standing before a bloody, heavily stained door, bracing for whatever danger lies ahead. Breathing heavily, Vlad catches his breath after rushing back inside the hideout. He steps into the room, only to find it completely wrecked, with blood and broken furniture scattered everywhere. A voice calls out to greet him, praising him for returning safely. His leader, Jorge, heavily bandaged across his chest, reveals that the penny pincher ambushed them while Vlad was away. Jorge curses the ruthless nature of their greedy enemies, who held nothing back in their assault. Deeply concerned by the destruction, Vlad asks if Jorge is alright. Jorge admits it has been a long time since they last had to fight an armored knight, standing near the slain enemy. Shifting focus to their plan, Jorge eagerly asks if Vlad managed to bring Stangar along. Vlad confirms he guided him toward the back entrance to avoid the scouts watching the front door. Fired up by the news, Jorge declares they will launch their counterattack tomorrow to settle things once and for all. Curious about their allies' condition, Jorge asks Vlad for his impression of Stangar and if he's still intact. Vlad reassures him that Stangar seemed fine and possessed a decent character. He comments on Stangar's imposing figure and agility, casually remarking that the man should take better care of his health. Vlad adds that Stangar even manifested aura, making him confident in their upcoming victory. Hearing those words, Jorge's expression instantly hardens with shock and dread. Just then, creaking footsteps ring out, prompting Vlad to assume Stangar has finally arrived. A dark figure clad in a blood-stained cloak slowly makes his way inside. Panicked, Jorge urgently questions Vlad again, needing absolute confirmation about the aura Vlad saw. Instantly gripping his sword, Jorge commands Vlad to get behind him right away. Breaking out in a cold sweat, Jorge warns that Stangar never possessed the ability to use aura. Confused, Vlad stammers in shock as heavy footsteps echo right behind him. The door creaks wide open to reveal a blood-soaked intruder wielding a crimson-stained blade. Tension suffocates the room as Jorge stares down the deadly newcomer with grave seriousness. With a sinister, glowing eye and a dark smirk, the intruder chillingly greets Jorge by name. Calmly wiping the blood off his blade with a rag, the ruthless killer muses on his aging body and the freezing cold. Hearing the distinct cuckoo bird calls echoing through the freezing night, the scarred assassin glances back over his shoulder. Looking past the bloody severed hand and shattered blade lying in the snow, he admits to himself that the bird signals are actually a decent imitation. Standing over the lifeless, blood-drenched body of his latest victim, he ponders whether his targets are truly foolish or deliberately calling out to him. Entering the lodge, the killer confronts Jorge, who stands ready with his sword drawn alongside his companions. With a bloody smirk, the assassin remarks on how much Jorge has changed, while Jorge nervously asks what brought him all this way. The assassin solemnly reveals the grim news that Count Gaethar has passed away. Upon hearing of the Count's death, Jorge's expression darkens into a mask of pure disbelief and rage. As he casually pours himself a drink, the intruder explains that while complications have kept the death secret for now, the whole realm will know soon. Their eyes lock, the killer's calm, purple gaze meeting Jorge's furious, glowing glare. Raising his brim-filled glass with a blood-stained leather glove, the assassin prepares a mock toast. Lifting the drink high under the dim light, he sarcastically dedicates the toast to the late Count Gaethar. Furious at the disrespect, Jorge boils with absolute rage, his eyes flaring with deadly intent. Unable to contain his fury any longer, Jorge erupts into an insult and swings his heavy sword downward with massive force. Charging forward like an enraged beast, Jorge closes the distance to obliterate the taunting killer. Watching Jorge's incoming strike reflected calmly through his glass, the assassin nonchalantly continues his sentence. Jorge's devastating blow shatters the floorboards with explosive force, throwing dust and splintered wood into the air. Liquid splashes through the air as everyone in the room watches the violent clash in utter shock. The assassin's dark cloak billows through the cloud of debris as he effortlessly dodges the destructive strike. Instantly appearing behind Jorge among the flying splinters, the assassin finishes his toast, declaring it for Sigmund, the new count. Recognizing his opponent, Jorge roars out the assassin's name, Godin, as he spins around to strike again. Their blades collide in a violent burst of sparks, locking the two powerful warriors in a test of sheer strength. Steel grinds against steel with a harsh rasping sound as both men push against each other with deadly force. Godin reveals that Lord Sigmund's very first decree as Count was demanding the immediate return of Jorge, the runaway knight. Refusing to acknowledge the new ruler, Jorge angrily shouts back that Sigmund is not his master. Pressing his advantage against Jorge's guard, Godin coolly notes that the Count anticipated Jorge would refuse to return peacefully. Godin chillingly adds that Sigmund has no desire for Jorge's loyalty either as their blades grind together. With a powerful surge of force, The impact shatters nearby shelves and sends Jorge tumbling backward in surprise. Taking immediate advantage, Godin lunges forward with lethal intent without giving his opponent room to breathe. Their footsteps skid heavily across the wooden floor as Godin relentlessly forces Jorge back. With an explosive kick, Godin sends Jorge crashing straight down through the upper floor structure. Upstairs, Vlad grabs Marcella and urgently pulls her away from the chaotic battlefield. As Jorge falls through the floor, Vlad quickly ushers Marcella toward the upper exit. Hearing the violent commotion on the balcony above, a loud crash echoes throughout the tavern corridor. Confused by the sudden structural collapse, the men drinking downstairs shout up to ask what is happening. Leaning frantically over the railing, Vlad screams down for Burry to rally everyone immediately. Before Vlad can finish his warning, Jorge's massive body smashes right through the floor beside him. Splintered wood explodes in all directions as Jorge plummets down toward the main hall. Vlad and Marcella stare down in utter horror at the terrifying spectacle unfolding before them. Jorge plummets upside down through the air, desperately holding onto his sword amidst falling debris. The men below look on in complete disbelief as their leader tumbles violently from above. Standing amidst the rising dust on the upper floor, Godin glares down with cold precision. Mocking his rival's futile resistance, Godin coolly remarks how Jorge remains as foolish as ever. Jorge impacts the lower floor with a violent crash, kicking up a massive shockwave of dust. Surrounding their fallen boss in sheer panic, the men cry out in shock at his sudden defeat. Wounded and coughing painfully on the ground, Jorge struggles to catch his breath. From high above, Godin calmly watches as Jorge tries to pull himself back up onto his knees. Exuding an overwhelming aura of menace, Godin gazes down with glowing eyes that send a chill through the room. Suddenly, a thrown dagger cuts sharply through the air, hurtling directly toward Godin. With lightning reflexes, Godin effortlessly deflects the incoming projectile using his sword guard. As the deflected blade buries itself into the floorboards, Vlad draws his sword and charges headlong at Godin. Their eyes lock in a tense split-second of mutual hatred, both knowing this clash will settle everything between them. With a powerful leap, Godin lunges straight down from the upper floor, blade raised to strike. Seeing Godin airborne, Vlad desperately shouts down to warn Jorge of the sudden incoming attack. Severely battered and struggling to even stand, Jorge grunts in pain, unable to react in time. Godin slams down like a thunderbolt, unleashing a massive impact right in front of the helpless veteran. The force of the landing blows Jorge back, his hands scraping against the floorboards as smoke fills the room. Godin smoothly turns around to face his wounded opponent, showing no remorse for his former comrade. In a cold, detached voice, Godin tells Jorge that he should have simply obeyed their master's orders back then. Unbroken, Jorge spits back that as a human being, he refuses to blindly follow such vile and monstrous commands. But Godin coldly counters, reminding him that above all else, his duty as a knight comes first. Jorge grits his teeth in fury, his conviction unshaken despite his fading strength. Sensing the danger, the surrounding men unsheathe their blades, rallying to defend their wounded commander. Godin glances sideways at the newly arrived fighters, his eyes glowing with ruthless focus. Weary of the endless resistance, Godin mutters that it has already been a far too exhausting night. He briefly closes his eyes, gathering his strength to end the battle once and for all. Deciding that he needs rest, he prepares to unleash his ultimate technique to clean up the room. Realizing what's coming, Vlad sprints at full speed to interrupt him before it's too late. Raising his sword vertically, Godin ignites his blade with a blinding flare of brilliant blue aura. Vlad screams out in sheer horror, reaching forward as he recognizes the deadly skill about to be unleashed. Through the swirling blue flames, Godin's sharp glare locks onto his targets with absolute lethal intent. Desperate to save his allies, Vlad cries out for Godin to stop his attack. But it's too late, as crisscrossing arcs of light slice across the room, ensnaring everyone in range. Jorge stares in helpless shock as the luminous threads of deadly aura entangle his entire body. Blurring through the air, Godin moves like a spirit, executing his lethal sword technique in a fraction of a second. In a flash of blinding light, a geometric net of razor-sharp aura completely engulfs the entire hall. The blinding burst of light forces the young boy to shield his face, stunned by the terrifying display of power unfolding before him. An overwhelming shockwave of razor-sharp sword aura tears through the entire structure, cutting everything in its path to pieces. As the blinding light fades and smoke settles over the wreckage, a heavy silence falls over the shattered hall. Coughing in the thick haze, the boy painfully pushes himself up from the ruined floor, struggling to gather his senses. Covered in dirt and bruises, He looks around in utter confusion, unable to comprehend the sudden devastation. His eyes widen in sheer horror as he realizes the floor is littered with the bloody, motionless bodies of his allies. Gritting his teeth in raw agony and fury, he curses at the cruel nightmare unfolding right in front of him. Suddenly, he freezes as an imposing, cloaked figure looms over him amidst the settling smoke. Looking up, his heart drops as he sees the bloody, lifeless face of his mentor held before him. His voice cracks in complete disbelief as he screams out Jorge's name, refusing to accept his death. Memories rush back to him of how Jorge was the first person to rescue him from a miserable life wandering the slums. To the young boy, Jorge was an invincible hero, the strongest man he had ever known. Yet, under the pale moonlight of that quiet night, even that incredible strength was ruthlessly crushed. Godin casually holds Jorge's severed head by the hair, displaying his cold-blooded cruelty without a shred of remorse. Reflected in the boy's trembling, tear-filled eye, his entire world brutally shatters into pieces. Overwhelmed by blinding rage, he tightly grabs his sword hilt and lets out a demonic scream of vengeance. Ignoring all warnings to stop, he swings his blade upward with every ounce of strength remaining in his body. A brilliant arc of concentrated sword aura bursts from his weapon, slashing straight toward the enemy. Godin glances at the incoming attack in surprise, instantly recognizing the advanced flying sword art. He wonders in shock how a mere kid from the slums could have possibly mastered such a high-level technique. A dark, amused smirk spreads across Godin's face as he grudgingly acknowledges the boy's talent. Blinded by murderous fury, the young swordsman lunges forward, screaming a desperate cry to kill his enemy. Before his blade can make contact, an explosive force blasts straight into the boy's chest with crushing weight. The sheer force of the blow sends the boy flying backward through the air like a helpless ragdoll. He slams violently onto the wooden floor, sliding across the planks as his weapon slips uselessly from his grip. Steam rises from the white-haired man's body as his dark cloak billows around him, his expression cold and focused despite the blood splattered across his clothes. He is deeply impressed by the boy's reflexes, realizing the youth instinctively twisted his body to avoid the lethal brunt of the attack. On the ground, the blond boy trembles violently, clutching his chest in agony as his lungs desperately struggle for air. Looking down at his defeated opponent, the man decides that the boy's raw talent is far too precious to snuff out right now. He envisions a future clash, knowing that they are destined to cross blades once again when the boy has grown much stronger. He recalls the words of his former mentor, Godin, who once told him how rewarding it is to watch the growth of true potential. The memories of his own past training echo in his mind as he stares down at the struggling boy. A quiet, knowing smirk plays across the warrior's blood-stained face as he makes his decision. Standing tall over the fallen youth, he firmly declares that true knights only accept fair rewards for their deeds. The boy looks up in utter confusion, coughing weakly as he tries to make sense of the man's words. With a sudden plop, a piece of jerky lands on the boy's head as the man reveals that his name isn't Stangar, and he isn't 42 years old. He drops another piece of jerky onto the boy, explaining that since he lied to get the food, he is returning it to maintain his honor. However, his expression darkens as he makes it clear that there is one thing he fully intends to keep. He holds out his hand, claiming his prize as both a fair reward and a proud symbol of his victory. The boy glares up with intense fury, baring his teeth as he vows to kill him, though the man remains completely unfazed. Without saying another word, the white-haired warrior turns away from his defeated opponent. As he walks away, he coolly warns the boy that he wouldn't trade his life just to get back a second piece of jerky. Humiliated and helpless, the boy seethes with absolute rage, his teeth clenched in a furious snarl. He screams out a desperate oath to end the warrior's life, calling out the name Godin as the man continues to walk away. The boy's frantic cries echo through the dark room as the man's silhouette slowly disappears into the exit. Tears of pure frustration stream down the boy's face as he shrieks his final promise of vengeance. Later that night, the red-haired girl helps the battered boy limp slowly through the quiet, snow-covered streets of the town. She holds him up as best as she can, her face filled with worry as he struggles to keep his balance. Suddenly, a sharp, throbbing pain shoots through his chest, forcing him to buckle and gasp in agony. He collapses onto the cold ground, sweat dripping from his face as he breathes heavily, completely pushed to his absolute limit. In the pitch-black darkness of his failing consciousness, a harsh, demanding voice cuts through, ordering him to get up. It's a memory of his past, where a mysterious woman in a dark dress stands over his younger, defeated self huddled on the floor of a dilapidated room. With a stern, uncompromising gaze, she demands he stand, asking if he would truly rather give up and die right there. The young boy slowly glances up, his striking blue eyes filled with exhaustion and despair as he clutches his knees. Unimpressed by his weakness, her expression hardens into a deep, frustrated frown. Without a shred of sympathy, she delivers a sharp slap across his face to snap him back to reality. She cold-bloodedly tells him to snap out of his self-pity, refusing to let him wallow in defeat. She questions him about the harsh reality of their world, asking if he knows the difference between the wealthy elites across the street and slum dwellers like them. Her eyes widen with intense determination as she declares that the crucial difference is opportunity. She explains that the privileged have the luxury to fail, get back up, and try again as many times as they want. But for people like them, the stakes are completely different, surrounded by the brutal aftermath of violence. She gestures to the grim scene, pointing out that this devastation is the tragic result of a single failure. Clenching his cloak tightly, the weight of her words sinks in. In their world, one mistake means death, so he must rise. Pulling him close, she commands him not to throw away the only chance he has to survive. Back in the present, the memory ignites a fire inside him, and he grinds his teeth as he prepares to force himself back up. His red-haired companion looks down in concern, asking if they should slow down, but he firmly insists they keep moving. Gritting his teeth through the intense physical pain, he vows to himself that he will not let his journey end in this alley. Suddenly, a hostile thug spots them from a distance, shouting out that he has found the kid who used to work for Jorge. Realizing they've been spotted, the two immediately dart forward, running for their lives. With their sanctuary compromised and the nest completely scattered, chaos erupts. It is now up to even the youngest and most vulnerable among them to face the danger. They are forced to learn how to survive and fly on their own as a pack of armed men chases them down the dark streets. The pursuers fan out through the narrow alleys, frustratedly calling them little rats as they try to track their path. A leader with a ponytail orders his men to search every single inch of the area, promising a generous reward for their capture. Cracking his knuckles in a rage, the man vows that the young protagonist will pay dearly for humiliating him in the past. The search party fans out immediately, their swords drawn as they shout to cover every corner, confident their targets are still nearby. Outside, the frantic sounds of rushing footsteps echo past a heavily bolted wooden door. The lock remains firmly secured as more pursuers sprint past, completely unaware of what lies on the other side. Inside, the blonde boy holds a dagger ready, while Gemina desperately covers her mouth to stifle her breathing, terrified of being discovered. Gritting his teeth, the boy realizes that staying hidden forever isn't an option and they won't escape if they stay cornered. He instructs Gemina to remain hidden and slip away only when it's safe, prompting her to ask what his own plan is. He explains that with the enemies hot on their trail, sticking together is far too risky, and he intends to draw them away to find a path. Gemina immediately refuses his plan, loudly insisting that she won't leave his side. She reminds him of his promise to Marcella, arguing that he was supposed to guide her safely to the convent before sunrise instead of abandoning her now. When he suggests she head to Harvin instead, she angrily screams that she absolutely refuses to go. Frustrated by her stubbornness, he harshly asks if she honestly thinks he is in any condition to keep her safe in his current state. Teardrops well up in Gemina's eyes as she struggles to find the words to argue back. Suddenly, both of them freeze in sheer panic as a voice from the shadows demands to know who is there. Reacting on pure instinct, Gemina reaches out to grab a knife resting on a nearby wooden workbench. As a massive silhouette carrying a bright lantern approaches, Gemina raises her weapon defensively. The lantern light reveals an older, white-bearded man who gasps in surprise at the intruders. The old man demands to know what two children are doing in his space, but Gemina shakily warns him not to take another step. Unfazed by the threat, the old man glares and reminds them that this is his house, so he will do whatever he wants. Trembling but determined, Gemina shouts back, warning him that she will stab him if he dares to move. The old man calmly observes the terrified girl, his experienced eyes scanning her tense expression. The blonde boy watches silently while Gemina stands her ground with tears streaming down her face. Recognizing their desperation, the old man gently suggests that she lower the knife so they can talk. Gemina's frustration boils over as she fumes in anger, refusing to let her guard down. Instead of complying, she brandishes the knife even more fiercely and demands that he hand over his sword. The old man is left utterly bewildered by her sudden and unexpected demand. She demands the specific sword hanging in front of his smithy, warning him that the world outside the city walls is just as dangerous as the slums. Brandishing her blade with absolute resolve, Gemina screams that she isn't playing games and demands he hand it over immediately. Though Vlad desperately tries to get her to lower the weapon, Gemina screams even louder, demanding the sword right this instant. The old man reflects on the harsh reality of the slums, knowing all too well that people must resort to theft just to survive another day. He remembers his own past, acknowledging that survival by any means necessary is how he managed to live this long. Looking at the desperate, tear-filled eyes of the young girl before him, he realizes it is now her turn to face that brutal struggle. A wave of profound pity washes over the old blacksmith as he looks at her tragic determination. Overcome with a mixture of fear and fury, Gemina grits her teeth as tears stream down her face. Groaning in frustration, she squeezes the handle of her knife with white-knuckled intensity. Vlad reaches out in panic, calling out her name to stop her from doing something irreversible. Expecting an attack, the old man slowly closes his eyes, preparing for the worst. But instead of striking him, a sharp slash rings out as the blade cuts through the air. Vlad watches in utter disbelief, his eyes widening as he witnesses what she is actually doing. Instead of attacking the blacksmith, Gemina grabs her long, vibrant red hair and slices it off at the roots. The old blacksmith opens his eyes, completely stunned by the unexpected sacrifice unfolding before him. She desperately promises that she will find a way to repay him for the sword. Holding out her severed locks as a pledge, she tearfully swears that she knows this isn't enough, but she will make things right in the future. With tears streaming down her face, she begs the old man to give Vlad the sword so he can survive. She lets the severed red strands flutter to the cold stone floor, leaving them at the blacksmith's feet. The old man stands in stunned silence, staring at the offering of hair on the ground. Turning his attention to Vlad, who stands ready with his own weapon, the blacksmith asks if he is truly planning to leave. With a heavy but resolute expression, Vlad confirms that he is indeed departing. The old blacksmith reflects that he never would have dreamed of attempting such a reckless journey in his entire life. He looks at the young boy, weighing the sheer gravity of the choice the youth is making. Yet, despite the immense danger, this young man is prepared to face the deadly world outside, armed with nothing but sheer resolve. He realizes the boy is trying to fly with wings that haven't even fully matured yet. Letting out a heavy sigh, the old blacksmith pinches his brow, grumbling about how much of a nuisance these kids are. Ultimately, he relents and tells them to follow him, prompting the tense young duo to step forward. Soon, a wooden cart filled with scrap metal and junk rattles loudly as it is rolled out into the snowy night. Under the cover of a quiet snowfall, the old man hauls the heavy cart through the desolate, snow-covered streets of the town. From behind the cart, a hooded helper complains about the terrible stench, but the old man sternly tells them to shut up and keep pushing since they have no other choice. Suddenly, a sharp voice calls out to him from the dark, catching the old man completely off guard. A group of armed thugs blocks their path, demanding to know what the blacksmith is doing out so late at night. Looking at them, the old man realizes with dread that these persistent hounds have blocked off even this entrance. The scarred leader peers closely at the cart, suspiciously questioning why anyone would be dumping garbage at such an ungodly hour. Putting on a convincing show of anger, the old man shouts back at them, calling them insolent brats and blaming them for the ruckus they've been causing in the streets. He rages that his smithy is bursting at the seams because of all the trash that has piled up while they blocked the roads. The scarred thug tells the furious old blacksmith to relax and not get his panties in a bunch. However, his gaze shifts to the hooded figure behind the cart, questioning who they are since the old man usually works alone. Quick on his feet, the old man yells that he was too tired to pull it alone and hired a helper for a simple piece of bread, asking if the thugs would rather push it themselves. The thug agrees to let the old man pass as a favor, but insists on checking the identity of the hooded helper, slowly drawing his sword. The cold steel of the blade is pressed right against the hood, causing the hidden figure to flinch in terror. The thug coldly warns them not to make a single move, threatening that they might lose a limb if they do. With a swift motion, the sharp blade slices clean through the fabric of the hood. The thug pulls his weapon back, eagerly waiting to see who has been hiding underneath. The old blacksmith watches on in absolute horror, holding his breath as their cover is seemingly blown. A whining voice complains, asking why they are giving them such a hard time. To the thug's surprise, it is a grimy, tear-faced kid who whimpers that all they wanted was some food. Disgusted by the pathetic sight, the thug sighs and tells the kid they can go. As they prepare to leave, the old man casually asks what they are searching for, and the thug reveals they are hunting for a missing blonde kid who worked for Jorge. Annoyed by the delay, the old man grumbles and asks if they can finally leave, but the thug stops them, saying he wants to make sure of one more thing. Beneath the pile of garbage, the hidden blonde boy waits in absolute silence as the thug orders his subordinate to inspect the cart. Both the red-haired kid and the old man freeze in sheer terror, realizing that their secret is on the verge of being exposed. The thug commands the guard not to search the cart right there to avoid making a mess, and the guard obediently complies. With a casual wave, the thug directs the guard to go check the cart elsewhere while he continues on his way. As they reluctantly move forward, the old man quietly regrets not taking a different route, but his companion points out that all other exits are likely blocked anyway. The guard peers at the massive pile of junk, commenting on just how much trash they are hauling. Suddenly, the guard spots something unusual and gasps in surprise. He turns his sharp gaze directly toward the nervous red-haired kid standing right beside the cart. The kid nervously fidgets under the guard's silent, intense scrutiny. Firmly gripping his spear, the guard mutters that he is only doing his job and shouldn't be blamed for what comes next. With a sudden, violent thrust, he drives his sharp spear straight down into the pile of garbage. The red-haired kid covers his face in horror while the old man watches in shock as the spear repeatedly plunges into the cart. To distract the guard, the old man quickly concocts a lie, claiming that Harvin has set a boat afloat on the river. They hold their breath, hoping this sudden piece of information will divert the guard's attention. As the spearhead narrowly grazes Vlad's face, the old man explains that everyone went down to investigate the highly suspicious boat. The old man adds that he is simply passing along the tip out of goodwill. Taking the bait, the guard pulls his spear out of the cart and tells them they are cleared to leave. The old man wastes no time, quickly pulling the rattling cart away while the guard's back is turned. As he walks away, the guard remembers his bruised younger brother, realizing this was his way of settling the debt of 40 silver. Safe for now, Vlad lies quietly in the cart, deeply relieved that the guard intentionally spared him. Watching the cart disappear into the distance, the kid mentally thanks Other for his silent mercy. The group finally approaches the massive stone gates of the city wall amidst the falling snow. Reaching the exit, the old man announces that they have finally made it to the waste dump located outside the city limits. With tears welling up in his eyes, the red-haired kid sniffles and bids a heartfelt farewell to Vlad, wishing him well on his journey. A fierce gust of wind sweeps through the dark night, carrying debris along with it. Vlad grips his sword tightly, bracing himself against the harsh elements with a sharp, resolute gaze. The old man looks down in contemplation, knowing that the boy carries a brilliant star within him, the realization of a lifelong dream. The young, red-haired boy tearfully clasps his hands together, praying with all his heart for Vlad's safe journey. That star of hope was paid for by the tears of a young lady, shining brightly amidst the cold, desolate ruins of the city walls. Under the brilliant glow of the full moon, the snow-covered mountain peaks stretch out into the quiet night. The polished blade of Vlad's sword reflects a warm, flickering light in the darkness. Vlad stares ahead quietly, his blue eyes filled with a deep, silent determination. Sitting by the warm campfire, Vlad holds the sword before him and asks if the entity within can hear his voice. To his surprise, a mysterious voice from within the sword softly responds, confirming that it can indeed hear him. Vlad demands to know who exactly is residing inside the blade, only for the voice to honestly admit that it has no idea. Vlad finds it absurd that a voice which has been constantly lecturing him on how to fight doesn't even know its own identity, leaving the entity speechless. Realizing he can use this to his advantage, Vlad proposes a deal to help each other out. He offers to help the entity recover its lost memories, but only if it agrees to teach him the secrets of master sword fighting. Vlad declares that he doesn't care if the voice belongs to a demon or some other sinister being. As a massive, glowing spectral night looms behind him under the moonlight, Vlad reflects on his deepest fear. With absolute resolve, he reveals that the only thing he truly fears is remaining a nobody for the rest of his life. Accepting the terms of the deal, the mysterious entity agrees to teach Vlad everything it knows. With their pact sealed, the giant spectral warrior raises its glowing sword behind the determined young boy. The entity promises to pass down its legendary knowledge of the sword. Meanwhile, in a completely different region, a massive military camp is established across the snowy plains at the foot of the mountains. A grand blue banner bearing a sword and castle crest flutters proudly in the wind outside the main tent. Inside, a hand impatiently taps a white game piece onto a detailed tactical map. Sitting arrogantly on his throne, Joseph Vaizid, the second son of House Vaizid, mutters that everything is going far too easily. However, a deep frown creases Joseph's face as he realizes that things being this easy might actually be a cause for concern. Just then, Joseph's loyal subordinate returns to the room, announcing his arrival to his master. Joseph addresses the imposing, one-eyed knight as Zaire, acknowledging his presence. Sensing his lord's dark mood, Zaire immediately asks what is troubling him. Joseph sighs, admitting that everything they are doing has been far too easy. While Zaire points out their success in clearing monsters with minimal casualties, Joseph remains suspicious about the unexplained disappearance of several troops. He worries that having nothing but missing soldiers and mediocre results to show will make everyone doubt his competence. He knows his father and the rest of his family are watching his every move, especially his formidable older half-brother, Rutger, who is a constant threat to his ambition. Zaire listens in grim silence, understanding the high stakes of this political struggle. Joseph realizes he will face total ruin unless he can secure his spot as the next count. If he fails, he knows Rutger will show him absolutely no mercy. The Vaizid family has always been a ruthless clan of warriors, built on a bloody legacy. After all, Joseph's own father claimed his title by ruthlessly eliminating his own brothers and sisters. Joseph laments his lack of powerful warriors under his direct command, excluding his loyal knight Zaire. Hearing this, Zaire reveals he has some intriguing news regarding that very issue, prompting Joseph to listen closely. Zaire mentions a highly suspicious mercenary, leading Joseph to wonder if his brother Rutger has sent a spy. Zaire clarifies that it is not that kind of suspicion, suggesting Joseph needs to see the proof with his own eyes. They head outside to inspect a goblin corpse marked with brutal, messy sword slashes. Holding a handkerchief to his nose to block the stench, Joseph dismisses the work as pathetic. Looking at the hanged goblin corpses, Joseph remarks that the cuts look like they were made by a complete novice. Zaire urges his master to look closer at the other bodies hanging nearby. As Joseph walks down the line of corpses, he notes that these wounds are just as poorly executed. He mutters that the swordsmanship displayed on the beasts is absolutely dreadful. However, as he continues his inspection, he notices that some of the cuts are slightly more refined. Suddenly, Joseph's eyes widen as he realizes that while the trajectory of the strikes is identical, the execution is completely different. Stunned by the implications, the master turns to Zaire, asking if this massive pile of carcasses could truly be the work of a single individual. Looking down the long rows of countless hung goblin corpses, he finds it hard to believe one person could have slain them all. Zaire confirms his master's suspicion, explaining that the freshest corpse arrived just yesterday. He goes on to reveal that the very first specimens they inspected were brought in only a month ago, sending a wave of shock through the master. Looking at the clean, precise cuts on the monster, the master mutters that such rapid growth in just a single month is completely impossible. With a grim expression, he demands to know the true identity of the mysterious warrior behind this terrifying progression. Meanwhile, deep within the frozen, snow-dusted mountains, a brutal battle is actively taking place. Blood splatters violently through the air as goblins are ruthlessly cut down in quick succession. A fierce warrior leads the charge, letting out a battle cry as he swings his blood-soaked blade against the oncoming horde. His comrades rally behind him, shouting orders to close the gap and ensure not a single monster escapes alive. Pulling his spear from a freshly slain beast, one of the fighters confidently declares that victory is finally within their grasp. He eagerly urges the rest of the squad to press forward and wipe out the remaining stragglers. However, the triumphant mood instantly shatters as the other soldiers freeze in sheer terror, their eyes widening at something behind him. Oblivious to the danger, the spearman asks why they look so frightened, completely unaware of the colossal, red-eyed beast looming directly behind him with a raised club. With a devastating swing, the giant monster smashes its massive club downward with crushing force. The impact creates a massive shockwave, blowing back the surrounding mercenaries as snow and debris explode outward. As the dust settles, the towering hobgoblin stands menacingly over the crushed, trembling body of the spearman. Terrified by the monster's overwhelming strength, the remaining mercenaries begin to falter and step back. The beast unleashes a deafening, blood-curdling roar that echoes through the snowy forest. It immediately charges forward, its heavy footsteps shaking the ground as the panicked soldiers scramble to react. With brutal, sweeping strikes, the beast easily bats the human fighters aside like ragdolls, sending them flying with bone-shattering force. Chaos erupts as the soldiers scream in panic, realizing the monster has already breached their defensive lines and urging everyone to retreat. From a safe distance on a snowy hill, their mounted commander watches the chaotic retreat in disbelief as the mercenaries swarm backward. Furious, the commander screams at his fleeing men, threatening to withhold their pay if they don't immediately return to the front line. The angry mercenaries shout back, arguing that a hobgoblin wasn't part of the deal, and suggest the cheap commander try fighting the beast himself. Enraged by their defiance, the commander curses his retreating men as he tightly grips his sword. Without hesitation, he rides his horse forward, ruthlessly trampling one of his own fleeing mercenaries into the snow. Nearby, the monstrous beast lets out a blood-curdling roar as it tears through another helpless soldier. Witnessing the horrific display up close, the commander's anger instantly turns to dread as he nervously gulps. Trying to mask his fear, he grunts in frustration while his horse stands frozen in the chilling wind. Suddenly, the steady crunch of footsteps in the deep snow breaks the tense silence. A mysterious blonde-haired warrior calmly approaches the battlefield, his hand resting near his blade. The retreating mercenaries stop in their tracks, utterly confused as they recognize the young man named Lyman stepping forward to face the beast. They realize it's Lyman the worshipper, who draws his sword with a sharp ring, his eyes glowing with an intense blue light. Catching his breath, Lyman steels his resolve, whispering to himself that he won't fail this time. With a sudden burst of speed, he launches himself directly toward the giant monster. The beast is caught completely off guard by the human's sudden and aggressive approach. Keeping his focus locked on his target, Lyman prepares to deliver a decisive strike. He swings his blade in a wide arc, successfully slicing across the creature's chest and drawing blood. Although the strike connects, Lyman immediately realizes the wound is far too shallow to stop the beast. In a split second, a warning voice screams in his head to retreat as the enraged monster raises its massive club. Lyman barely manages to duck as the heavy weapon swings dangerously close over his head. The devastating blow slams into the snow, narrowly missing him but unleashing a powerful shockwave. He skids backward across the icy ground, desperately trying to regain his footing. Frustrated by his poor execution, Lyman curses himself for failing to land a lethal blow once again. A voice in his head scolds him for not following instructions, prompting Lyman to mentally retort that he isn't an instant genius. Insisting that he is still learning, Lyman watches as the massive beast charges back toward him with heavy stomps. Roaring in fury, the monster raises its club once more, determined to crush the annoying human. Lyman swiftly ducks beneath the incoming attack, keeping his eyes locked on the beast's movements. The giant club swooshes harmlessly through the air as Lyman agilely evades yet another deadly strike. As a powerful gust sweeps past him, Lyman remains completely unfazed, his sharp blue eyes tracking the trajectory of the attack. Frustrated by his target's agility, the massive beast grits its fangs in pure rage, desperate to land a solid hit. With a deafening roar, the colossal monster raises its massive club high into the air, unleashing a ferocious downward swing. Standing directly beneath the beast's shadow, Lyman prepares himself as the overwhelming force threatens to crush him. The heavy club slams violently into the frozen ground, triggering a massive shockwave that sends snow exploding in all directions. As the thick cloud of snow begins to settle, the beast looks down, only to find nothing but empty air where its target should have been. The sheer power of the impact leaves a deep crater in the ice, yet Lyman has completely vanished from the strike zone. Deep down, Lyman makes a silent, unwavering vow to himself that this next strike will be the one to end it all. Sensing an ominous presence, the monster suddenly shudders, its glowing white eyes widening in sheer terror. Enveloped in a blazing blue aura of mana, Lyman prepares to execute a devastating slash that will cut clean through his opponent. While the beast freezes in shock, a mysterious spectator watching from afar instantly recognizes the young warrior's name. The spectator wonders in disbelief if this formidable fighter could truly be the legendary Lyman the worshipper. Intrigued by this display of power, the noble lord commands his subordinate, Zaire, to investigate everything about Lyman's identity. Placing a hand over his chest in a respectful salute, the loyal eye-patched knight immediately accepts his master's orders. Looking back at the battlefield, the noble lord still finds it hard to believe the rapid growth he is witnessing. He recalls how Lyman's sword strikes were clumsy and amateurish just a month ago, yet he is already forming a perfect sword art. A subtle smirk appears on the lord's face just as Lyman's glowing blue blade cleanly slices through the beast's flesh. With an elegant and blindingly fast dash, Lyman cuts the giant monster completely in half, leaving a trail of blood in the snow. Staring coldly into the distance, Lyman's brilliant blue eyes solidify the lord's realization that the boy is a true genius. Sometime later, workers begin cleaning up the snowy battlefield, complaining that none of the fallen beasts hold any valuable loot. Lyman looks down at the dead hobgoblin in disappointment, realizing that even the strongest monster here didn't drop anything worthwhile. Suddenly, an excited scout rushes over to Lyman, showering him with enthusiastic praise for his incredible combat performance. Lyman coldly tells him to shut up and collect the corpses, but the talkative scout reveals he has already secured all of Lyman's kills. The scout then mentions that the expedition is wrapping up, eagerly proposing that they team up for future quests. Hoping to combine Lyman's strength with his own supposed intellect, the scout is immediately shut down as Lyman walks away, refusing to associate with crooks. The scout stares in silence, his expression hardening as Lyman rejects his proposal. But as Lyman walks away, the scout stops him in his tracks by bringing up his mercenary badge. He smugly warns Lyman that he won't be able to keep using that badge for much longer. The scout offers to hook him up with someone who can forge an exact copy, but Lyman coldly cuts him off. Turning back with a terrifying, glowing blue glare, Lyman warns him that a loose tongue is the quickest way to find an early grave. He delivers a chilling ultimatum. If this is just a business offer, it's his final warning, but if it's blackmail, he will end his life right here. The sheer bloodlust radiating from Lyman leaves the scout completely paralyzed and shivering in absolute terror. Desperately backpedaling, the scout stammers that he was only trying to help, arguing that Lyman's talent deserves far more than a captain's measly pay. Unmoved by the excuses, Lyman commands him to shut up and finish packing before he decides to decapitate him. Fearing for his life, the scout quickly surrenders and runs off to do exactly as he's told. Letting out a heavy sigh, Lyman notes to himself that he will eventually have to teach that guy a permanent lesson. As Lyman heads out, the rest of the expedition crew continues loading carts full of slain monsters. Watching him leave, the nearby mercenaries assume Lyman is heading off to pray once again, marveling at how incredibly devout he seems. In reality, Lyman finds a quiet spot in the snowy forest, kneeling down and resting his hands on the hilt of his sword. From afar, the other soldiers watch in awe, convinced that his elegant posture means he must be a noble from an entirely different social class. But in truth, Lyman is secretly whispering curses under his breath in pure frustration. He is actually fuming over his own performance, wondering why on earth he can't seem to defeat monsters with a single strike. His inner guide suddenly speaks up, calling him a numbskull and reminding him that the secret to a lethal blow lies entirely in the element of surprise. The voice tries to explain the technique using ridiculous sound effects like wish and whoosh, leaving Lyman completely dumbfounded by the useless advice. The voice insists it's simple, but Lyman is left in a state of utter disbelief, trying to process the absurd instructions. As Lyman continues to grumble curses about wish and whoosh, the mercenaries behind him join in prayer, completely misinterpreting his angry mumbling as a sacred ritual. Sometime later, the expedition camp is fully set up amidst the vast, snow-covered mountains. Inside one of the tents, a hot bowl of steaming, mysterious meat stew is served. Staring down at his spoon with deep suspicion, Lyman nervously questions what kind of meat he is actually about to eat. The scout beside him happily gobbles it down, pointing out that since the food is free, it doesn't really matter where it came from. The scouts at the outdoor table count their blessings, noting that few employers feed their staff, though working for the prestigious Vaizid family does come with the perk of free, if slightly salty, meals. Leaving them to their meal, Lyman stands up and turns away, telling them to enjoy their food as he departs. As Lyman walks through the snowy camp, the scouts watch his back, wondering if their captain is off to see the priest again, and joking that perhaps they should start praying too. A dark thought crosses the narrator's mind, thinking that for those men, praying is already far too late. Lyman approaches a large, ornate blue tent adorned with a Holy Cross banner, marking it as the local chapel. Inside, the warm and welcoming Father Andrea greets Lyman with a bright smile, holding a holy book in his hands. Lyman bows respectfully, asking the priest if he had a restful night's sleep, to which Father Andrea assures him he slept perfectly fine. The priest mentions hearing that Lyman went out to pray again the previous night, expressing concern over how freezing cold it must have been. Lyman claims that no cold can touch him while wrapped in the Lord's warm embrace, though internally he reflects on the exhausting sword practice he was actually doing. Father Andrea bursts into laughter, teasing Lyman that he sounds far more like a devout priest than he himself does. Just then, a young boy named Jean enters the room to announce that breakfast has been prepared, earning a warm thank you from the priest. Father Andrea gently pats Lyman's shoulders and invites him to join them for breakfast, despite Lyman's polite protest that he didn't come to eat. Sitting together at the wooden table laden with fresh bread, Father Andrea leads them all in a pre-meal prayer. As the prayer thanks the Lord for their daily bread and asks for the strength to do good works, Lyman clasps his gloved hands together. During the prayer, Father Andrea sneaks a quick peek with one eye open to observe the young captain. Looking at Lyman's peaceful face, The priest is deeply moved by just how genuine and pure the young man's devotion seems. He marvels at how Lyman has managed to retain his profound sincerity despite being surrounded by the constant misery of war. The priest resolves that he must guide this young soul, who seems tragically destined to wander through bloody battlefields until the day he dies. Concluding that their connection is surely a divine gift from God, Father Andrea finishes his prayer with a solemn Amen. With the prayer finished, the priest warmly invites Lyman to dig in, and Lyman politely thanks him. Seeing the steaming soup, fresh wheat bread, and cheese, Lyman is thrilled to finally lay his eyes on what he considers real, high-quality food. As Lyman eagerly takes a bite of the delicious bread, Father Andrea shifts the conversation to discuss Lyman's incredible swordsmanship. The priest explains that while he already knew of Lyman's extraordinary talents, it seems Joseph Vaizid has also taken notice, as Lord Zaire recently stopped by to ask about him. Caught completely off guard with his cheeks stuffed with food, Lyman asks in surprise what happened next. With a proud and gentle smile, Father Andrea reveals that he highly recommended Lyman to the noble lord. Father Andrea warmly tells Lyman that he assured the lord of his bright future, leaving the young man frozen in shock with his cheeks still stuffed with food. Andrea explains that the renowned Vaizid family of the north holds immense influence, and securing a position with them would completely change Lyman's life for the better. Despite the priest's encouraging words that he is more than worthy of this chance, Lyman can only gulp in deep anxiety. Out in the quiet, snow-covered woods, Lyman realizes that this situation is turning incredibly dangerous for him. He laments that he must have stood out far too much, though he had no choice but to use his sword techniques to practice them. A mysterious voice questions if he got too close to Father Andrea, but Lyman defends his actions, stating he needed to verify something first. The voice asks if Lyman is finally convinced that they are not an evil spirit after interacting with a holy man. Since the highly respected priest with powerful holy energy didn't sense anything malicious from the voice, Lyman reluctantly accepts that they might be safe. While the voice suggests a lord would overlook a fake identity for someone of Lyman's talent, Lyman seriously contemplates whether he should just flee. He worries that any investigation into his past will reveal he killed a mercenary for stealing, which would slap him with charges of both identity fraud and murder. When the spirit jokes that he sounds like a true villain, Lyman quickly points out that they were an accomplice to the deed. Deciding that flight is his best option since self-defense requires witnesses, Lyman resolves to escape tonight and bring God along to forge a new badge. But the spirit suddenly warns him that running away might no longer be an option, catching Lyman off guard. The spirit senses a powerful presence approaching from behind, identifying the newcomer's energy as that of an elite knight. Instantly on high alert, Lyman whips around with his blade drawn to face the threat. The approaching warrior, a rugged man wearing an eye patch and heavy armor, grunts in mild surprise at Lyman's swift reaction. Lyman keeps his guard up, keeping his eyes locked onto the formidable stranger. The knight secretly marvels at Lyman's sharp senses, realizing the young man detected his approach much faster than expected. Keeping his composure, the knight delivers the message that Lord Joseph has requested Lyman's presence immediately. Regretting that he didn't flee sooner, Lyman knows he must not show even a single hint of weakness to this elite warrior. Forcing a polite smile, Lyman claims he is honored, relying on his poker face to hide his mounting panic. When the knight asks if he knew he was coming, Lyman smoothly lies, claiming Father Andrea had warned him to expect a visitor. The veteran knight is highly amused, impressed that a mere child of a mercenary can stand before him without flinching. Turning on his heel, the knight commands Lyman to follow him back to the lord. Left with no other choice, Lyman watches the knight lead the way, preparing himself for the tense encounter ahead. As Lyman contemplates making a sudden run for it, a chilling inner warning tells him not to even think about it. He realizes that a warrior of the knight's caliber could easily behead him before he could even take 3 steps. Walking ahead with absolute confidence, the knight's imposing figure leaves no room for escape. Cursing under his breath, Lyman reluctantly grips his sword and realizes he has no choice but to comply. They soon arrive at a grand, snow-covered military tent adorned with a prominent blue banner displaying a sword crest. Inside, Lord Joseph welcomes them, holding a book as he expresses his pleasure at their arrival. Lyman bows deeply in respect, offering his formal greetings to the Lord. When Joseph asks if everything has been to his liking, Lyman quickly assures him that everyone is deeply grateful for his kindness. Noting Lyman's blonde hair and blue eyes, Joseph confesses he initially suspected the boy came from a fallen noble lineage. When Joseph asks to confirm if his name is indeed Lyman, the boy quietly confirms it. Joseph suddenly snaps his book shut, mentioning that he should have informed him of something beforehand. Without warning, the knight delivers a brutal backhand slap that sends Lyman reeling. Stunned by the sudden violence, Lyman glares back as the knight stares down at him with cold indifference. With a menacing aura, Joseph coldly declares that he absolutely detests liars. Joseph then reveals his true identity, addressing him directly as Vlad of Skowara. Realizing his cover is blown, Vlad asks how they knew, only for Joseph to mention they know his mother's background but not his father's. Joseph leans in slightly, mockingly asking if Vlad happens to know who his father is. Angered by the insult, Vlad snaps back, asking if it's some kind of sick joke to ask a prostitute's son about his father. For his insolence, the knight delivers a swift, heavy kick to Vlad's legs. Grunting in pain, Vlad collapses heavily onto the floor. The knight commands Vlad to show some respect, while the boy can only glare back in silent fury. Joseph steps forward, telling the knight it's fine and admitting he actually found Vlad's retort quite amusing. Looking down on the boy, Joseph deduces that Vlad likely killed a mercenary to steal his badge. He adds that he is already fully aware of the reasons behind Vlad's flight from Skowara. Finally, Joseph demands to know where a boy of his background managed to learn such high-level sword-fighting skills. Vlad remains silent, his piercing blue eyes glowing with intensity as he stares back, refusing to give an easy answer. Joseph gazes deeply into Vlad's eyes, noting that there is clearly a great deal of hidden truth buried behind that intense look. Suddenly, Sir Zaire draws his sword with a sharp ring, catching Vlad completely off guard. Feeling the pressure, Vlad bites his lip in frustration, trying to come up with a believable excuse. Vlad kneels down and claims that he learned his formidable skills from a mysterious master. He explains that this teacher appeared and vanished as suddenly as a flash of lightning, leaving no trace behind. This mysterious explanation immediately piques Joseph's curiosity, catching him by surprise. Vlad adds that the mysterious figure never revealed his name, but did pass on a crucial piece of information. In Vlad's memory, the silhouette of a powerful warrior holding a glowing sword stands amidst a storm of blue lightning. Vlad firmly states that the master declared this to be a secret sword technique forbidden to be taught to any other soul. Seeing absolutely no hesitation in the boy's eyes, Joseph accepts the story and apologizes for their aggressive interrogation. Outwardly calm but sweating inwardly, Vlad wonders if the Lord actually believed his fabricated story. Joseph then reveals that he is currently facing a serious dilemma and wishes to make Vlad a proposition. Addressing him directly by his full title, Joseph calls out to Vlad of Skowara. He asks Vlad if he desires to escape his current circumstances and build a far better life for himself. Joseph tempts him with promises of power, freedom, survival, and even knighthood. Standing before his noble crest, Joseph Vaizid formally offers to become Vlad's official sponsor. Sometime later, the sharp clatter of wooden training swords echoes through the air as a sparring session begins. Vlad fiercely trades blows with Sir Zaire, holding his own against the seasoned knight strikes. Nearby spectators observe the match, noting that while Vlad is holding his own, Zaire is clearly holding back. As the wooden swords crash in the snowy courtyard, the onlookers wonder if Vlad has officially become Zaire's squire, acknowledging his impressive martial talent. The spectators comment on how incredibly lucky Vlad is, as his entire destiny is on the verge of a massive turnaround. Vlad grunts in pain as he barely manages to block a heavy, crushing blow from Zaire's wooden sword. Zaire mockingly calls Vlad an arrogant brat, questioning how he dared to act so confident in front of Lord Joseph with such mediocre skills. With a series of rapid, whistling slashes, Zaire declares that it is time for the boy to learn his true place. Vlad instantly realizes that Zaire is on an entirely different level, finding himself trapped in a dilemma where dodging only invites immediate follow-up strikes, while blocking is nearly impossible due to the sheer weight of the blows. With no easy options left, Vlad prepares to make a desperate move as Zaire lunges forward with another swift, whistling strike. Locking his focus entirely on his opponent, Vlad glares with absolute determination, searching for even the slightest opening. He unleashes a powerful counterswing, pouring all his strength into meeting Zaire's blade head-on. The two wooden swords collide and scrape harshly against one another as Vlad attempts to redirect the incoming force. Capitalizing on the momentum, Vlad executes a swift downward slash, determined to break through his mentor's guard. With his eyes glowing with intense focus, Vlad drives his sword forward in a blindingly fast strike. The clash erupts with a loud impact as Vlad successfully forces Zaire to block his aggressive assault. The spectating soldiers are left thoroughly impressed, cheering loudly as they witness the boy successfully parry the heavy blow. Zaire lowers his weapon with a satisfied look, acknowledging that Vlad's performance is finally starting to meet his expectations. Panting heavily and drenched in sweat, Vlad remains self-critical, realizing deep down that he didn't truly earn that successful strike on his own merit. He understands that Zaire deliberately held back and allowed him to parry the attack to teach him a lesson. Vlad's jaw drops in horror as Zaire casually announces they will be undergoing this brutal sparring session twice a day, every single morning and evening. Concluding their morning session, Zaire walks away through the snow, advising the exhausted boy not to linger too long in the freezing cold. Vlad stands frozen in place, silently watching his formidable instructor retreat toward the military camp. Vlad feels frustrated that he didn't receive a single piece of verbal advice, but a mysterious voice notes that the duel itself was actually an excellent fight. The inner voice explains that the intense sparring forced Vlad to strip away all wasteful and unnecessary movements from his style. Ultimately, taking a harsh beating proves to be the most effective way for a warrior to truly learn and adapt. Clicking his tongue in annoyance, Vlad grumbles about how it feels like absolutely nobody is ever on his side. Meanwhile, outside the main command tent, a high-ranking figure inquires about Zaire's official evaluation of the boy. Standing respectfully inside the tent, Zaire reports to Lord Joseph, admitting that the boy indeed possesses genuine potential. Zaire goes on to say that if Vlad had been born into a noble family, even the Count himself would have taken a personal interest in his growth. Lord Joseph smiles with smug satisfaction, pleased to have his initial instincts about the boy's talent validated. However, Zaire points out that Vlad's primary flaw is his sheer arrogance, as the boy still does not understand his proper place. Joseph dismisses this concern with a knowing smile, noting that such behavior is natural for someone raised in the slums, and promises they can easily teach him the proper manners over time. Joseph looks at Zaire and confidently declares that he believes he is looking at the absolute perfect man for the job, while Zaire remains completely silent. Zaire, however, is not so easily convinced, firmly pointing out that a warrior who lacks loyalty can never truly be trusted. Joseph simply smiles, admitting he wouldn't have trusted the boy even if he had bowed down immediately, and adds that he actually prefers Vlad's blunt honesty. For Vlad, his only focus is the glowing determination burning inside him, knowing there is still a vital task he must complete. Joseph recognizes this mutual drive, believing it is actually better this way since both of them have something to gain by helping each other. Seeing his master's resolve, Zaire simply nods in agreement, submitting to Joseph's judgment. Yet, Joseph can't help but compare Vlad's wild nature to that of a beast, questioning if he is just like a wolf. Indeed, Vlad carries the fierce spirit of a massive, glowing-eyed wolf looming directly behind him, ready to strike. It is that exact arrogant, untrustworthy, and smug attitude that makes him so dangerous. But Joseph is patient, knowing he is in no rush, as it takes a great deal of time to build a cage large enough. He plans to slowly construct a trap subtle enough to trick a wild wolf into believing it is completely free. Meanwhile, night falls over the freezing, mist-covered forest where the expedition forces are stationed. One of the guards stands watch, shivering uncontrollably and cursing the thick, icy mist blanketing the winter night. Huddled over his spear, the guard laments how Vlad somehow became Sir Zaire's squire, wishing he had convinced Vlad to run away with him much sooner. Still, he begrudgingly admits Vlad is incredibly lucky to be promoted and spared from standing out in the freezing cold. Suddenly, a rustling sound breaks the silence as a heavily armored officer approaches, demanding to know if everything is in order. The guard quickly straightens up, nervously stammering to Sir Roderick that there is nothing to report, while the officer sternly commands him to stay vigilant. Saluting with forced enthusiasm, the guard promises Roderick can count on him as the officer turns to continue his rounds. The guard watches silently as Roderick's imposing figure disappears back into the dark, snowy woods. Once the officer is out of sight, the guard scoffs at how incredibly stiff Roderick is, relieved that he won't be returning to this area anytime soon. Eager for a break, the guard leans comfortably against a nearby tree, deciding it is finally time to get some much-needed shut-eye. His eyelids grow heavy, and he quickly begins to doze off while resting his weight against his spear. But his rest is instantly cut short when Roderick's voice suddenly echoes nearby, demanding to know what someone is doing there. Startled and confused, the guard peers into the darkness, wondering who on earth the officer could possibly be speaking to. Peeking around the tree, the guard spots Roderick confronting a mysterious figure in the distance, shouting in confusion at a woman who seems to mistake him for her child. The guard is completely bewildered, wondering why Roderick suddenly stopped speaking mid-sentence after mentioning a child. A cold sweat breaks out on his face as he swallows hard, sensing that something is terribly wrong. Stepping away from the campfire, he cautiously moves forward, his boots crunching loudly in the deep snow. Suddenly, his eyes widen in sheer panic as he spots something unbelievable ahead. He watches in confusion as Roderick begins walking away, realizing that the officer is heading deep into the dark woods instead of back to the camp. He gasps in disbelief, unable to comprehend what is drawing his superior officer away. That's when he notices a sinister, black mist wrapping around Roderick's body like a physical curse. Roderick's eyes are completely glazed over and lifeless, showing he has lost all control of his own actions. A horrific, screaming spectral entity emerges from the darkness, shrieking with pure malice. Meanwhile, in the bright of day, a young blonde knight named Lyman rubs his aching neck, complaining about a brutal training session. An inner voice reminds him that sparring with a legendary knight like Zaire is a rare, highly sought-after privilege. Lyman sighs, convinced that Zaire just enjoys beating him up, even though the voice insists that such harsh desire makes the lesson invaluable. He can't help but feel a little depressed by that harsh reality. Suddenly, a frantic whispering voice breaks the silence, calling out for Lyman by his title. Lyman turns to see the guard, Got, hiding behind a tree and desperately waving him over for an urgent conversation. Surprised to see him, Lyman asks when got back, as he didn't think the expeditionary forces had returned yet. Got drops a bombshell, declaring that he plans to desert and run away from the camp tonight, leaving Lyman utterly confused. He explains that he only came to warn Lyman out of goodwill, hoping they will remain on good terms if they ever meet again. Demanding to know what is going on, Lyman listens closely as Got prepares to reveal a terrifying secret he witnessed firsthand. Got begins his warning by pointing toward the dark woods. He reveals that the very forest they are trying to clear of monsters is actually cursed. Lyman's eyes widen as the gravity of the guard's words sinks in. Got points out how strange it is that so many soldiers have supposedly deserted, despite the excellent pay and conditions, and Lyman has to agree. With absolute dread, Got explains that those men didn't desert, the forest took them, and they are actually missing. He reveals the horrifying truth that he saw ghosts actively leading the soldiers deep into the woods, never to return. Got frantically insists that ghosts are actively luring unsuspecting people straight into the dark woods. The young blonde knight stands silently, completely unmoved by the soldier's wild supernatural claims. Raising a hand to cut him off, the knight dismisses the story as complete nonsense, though Got desperately begs him to believe it. However, the knight's skepticism vanishes instantly when Got reveals that even one of their fellow knights vanished just the night before. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the blonde knight deduces he must be talking about Sir Roderick, which the soldier quickly confirms. Got explains that he investigated further on his journey back, discovering a terrifyingly specific pattern among all those who had vanished. Every single person who has gone missing in these woods shared the exact same trait. They all had black hair. Frustrated and consumed by dread, Got curses under his breath, wishing he had never gotten involved in this mess. Regretting his own sense of duty, he mutters that he should have simply packed his bags and fled while he still had the chance. As Got walks off grumbling to himself, the commanding knight on horseback watches his retreat with a contemplative gaze. Sir Zaire asks if the soldier's words can truly be trusted, to which the young knight admits that while Got isn't reliable, he wouldn't fabricate a lie like this. The veteran commander hums thoughtfully, weighing the strange details of the report. He notes that Lord Joseph would actually view this mysterious crisis as a perfect opportunity to prove their worth. To them, solving a bizarre supernatural phenomenon is far more valuable than simply hunting down common monsters. Yet, a lingering unease remains as Zaire ponders the bizarre detail that only black-haired soldiers are being targeted. The young knight points out that the main camp is guarded by 3 knights, but Zaire bitterly counters that none of them are actually capable warriors. Since Roderick is gone, Zaire knows he cannot afford to stay behind, as a strong leader is desperately needed to guide the troops. Leading the way, Got points out the expeditionary forces' campsite nestled in the snowy valley ahead. Upon their arrival, a young squire named Ern steps forward and bows respectfully, introducing himself as Roderick's assistant. Zaire immediately asks if there was any sign of Roderick in the woods, but the squire sadly confirms they found absolutely nothing. Ern explains that even the most skilled mercenary hunters searched the area but couldn't locate a single footprint. Sensing the gravity of the mystery, Zaire decides he will have to personally investigate the woods. He orders the soldiers to split into groups of 3, strictly warning them to stay within each other's line of sight at all times. As the sun begins to set, casting a brilliant orange and red glow over the mountain range, a tense atmosphere settles over the forest. Left to join the search, Got seethes with resentment, feeling completely betrayed by being forced back into the terrifying woods. Got bitterly complains that he was tricked into risking his life, But the young captain dismisses his whining, urging him to stay focused and promising to make it up to him later. Sir Zaire approaches from behind to check on their progress, only to be met with the disappointing news that neither of them has found any trace yet. Muttering about how futile standard tracking is, the blonde youth asks how people in the city slums track down someone who goes missing. With total seriousness, he explains his street-level logic, claiming they usually just grab a random passerby and beat them until information spills out. Completely unimpressed by the ridiculous tactic, Sir Zaire dismisses his crude idea as entirely useless. Gazing into the fading light, the knight laments that, with nightfall quickly approaching, they may soon be forced to call off the search empty-handed. Suddenly, Sir Zaire pauses as his gaze catches something in the distance. Looking out toward the frozen expanse of water ahead, he asks if previous search parties had ever checked the opposite bank. Got quickly clarifies that the original expedition never headed in that direction, meaning no one has crossed the river yet. Realizing the near forest has already been cleared of clues, Sir Zaire deduces that Roderick cannot possibly be on this side. He calculates that the same logic applies to the mysterious woman they are hunting. Without hesitation, Sir Zaire issues a commanding order to assemble all the mercenaries so they can cross the river at once. Scott raises his fingers to his lips, letting out a sharp whistle to summon the scattered search parties. Reaching the riverbank, Sir Zaire taps the frozen surface with his boot, noting that the ice sheet isn't entirely solid. He reasons that while winter is nearing its end, the surface should still be thick enough to support their weight across. Kneeling down to inspect the frozen river himself, the young captain advises that they spread their numbers out evenly to avoid cracking the ice. As the mercenaries rush over asking if they have found a lead, God informs them that the plans have changed. Sir Zaire addresses the assembled men, declaring that the search is expanding across the river and ordering them to cross in 3 separate groups. The mercenaries bark out their obedience in unison, ready to carry out Sir Zaire's command. The first squad of armed men steps onto the glistening ice, beginning their cautious march across the river. Watching the troops advance, Got groans in distress, drawing a questioning glance from his young captain. With an uneasy look on his face, Got admits that a heavy sense of dread has suddenly overcome him. When the blonde leader mocks him for just being terrified, Got loudly fires back that he isn't a fearless combat prodigy like his captain. Got insists that normal men like him have to rely entirely on their survival instincts to make it out alive. And watching the soldiers march toward the blinding glow of the sunset, every gut instinct he has warns him that crossing this river is a grave mistake. The blonde youth turns back to the hesitant soldier, declaring that while he might not understand instincts, one thing is beyond any doubt. With a chilling, cold glare, he warns the man that fleeing right now will only guarantee a far more painful demise. The terrified spearman trembles in horror as the captain points out that a fleeing witness would instantly become a prime target to be hunted down and tortured. Ordering him to shut up and move, he insists that their sole chance at survival is to cross the frozen river ahead. Muttering curses under his breath, the frightened soldier reluctantly tiptoes across the slippery ice, terrified that the frozen crust won't hold. Suddenly, a loud crack echoes through the air as the delicate ice begins to fracture right beneath his boots. Gasping in sheer panic, the soldier stammers to his captain that the frozen surface is on the verge of breaking apart. Unfazed, the captain sarcastically agrees, threatening that if he keeps complaining, he will personally break the ice and throw him into the freezing water. Overcome with fear, the guard collapses onto his hands and knees, weeping that he simply cannot go any further. Annoyed by his cowardice, the captain grabs the man by his collar and drags him along, yelling at him to get moving before they fall behind. As the guard flails helplessly across the smooth ice, the captain loses his patience, warning him that his tolerance is rapidly running out. But before he can finish his threat, the captain abruptly stops as something down below catches his attention. Looking directly through the translucent ice, the soldier gasps in utter terror as he spots pale human bodies staring back up at them. Dozens of dead bodies lie preserved beneath the frozen river, trapped under the thick blue sheet of ice. The horrified scream alerts the rest of the unit, causing the eye-patch-wearing leader and his men to stop in their tracks. As shouts ring out about the corpses below, an eerie blue glow begins radiating from deep within the frozen river. Beneath the surface, countless drowned corpses suddenly awaken, reaching their pale hands upward toward the living soldiers above. A violent impact shakes the entire ice sheet, catching the men completely off guard as the structure begins to crack. Chaos erupts as the frozen river fractures, with frightened soldiers shouting for everyone to rush across before it collapses completely. Desperate to survive, they scramble forward as giant shards of ice are violently thrust into the air. With explosive force, A giant pale hand violently erupts through the frozen crust. Fiendish undead creatures emerge from the icy depths, roaring with malicious fury as they flood the surface. The mercenaries assemble in a defensive circle, realizing to their absolute horror that they are surrounded on all sides. Panic-stricken, the soldiers scream out to Sir Zaire, desperately asking for orders on how to handle the nightmare unfolding around them. Clenching his teeth as his eye glows with rage, Zaire grimly realizes that they have walked right into a deadly trap. Sir Zaire comes to the horrifying realization that this ambush was meticulously set up specifically for their arrival. As an ominous hum fills the dusk air, Sir Zaire looks over his shoulder, his instincts screaming that danger is imminent. Night falls rapidly over the mountains, bringing an engulfing darkness that belongs to something far beyond the living. Out of the shadows, a horde of blue-eyed, raving ghouls rushes forward to tear the soldiers apart. Meanwhile, at a nearby snowy encampment lit by flickering torches, inside a prayer tent, a young acolyte kneels before a holy altar, offering thanks for another day of survival. Beside the priest, the boy continues his prayer, asking the Lord to guide his path toward the light. Suddenly, Father Andrea abruptly stops praying, feeling a sudden, bone-chilling presence overcome the room. Sensing the priest's sudden shock, the young boy looks up in confusion as Father Andrea begins to tremble uncontrollably. Right on the altar, the holy water inside the golden cup begins to violently pulse and swirl. Father Andrea gasps in utter horror as a vile, pitch-black miasma erupts directly from the sacred chalice. Outside, a heavy silence falls over the remote military base hidden beneath the snowy peaks. A dense, unnatural fog rolls across the camp, suffocating the area in an eerie haze. Floating barefoot through the dark fog, a terrifying spirit drifts forward, whimpering for her child. Enveloped in a tempest of malevolent purple aura, the Wraith demands to know where her stolen child has been hidden. Back on the battlefield, a ferocious ghoul with glowing eyes leaps through the air with murderous intent. Terrified out of his mind, a fallen scout screams in desperation for his captain to save him. Before the monster can land a blow, a lightning-fast sword stroke slices clean down the center of its skull, splitting the undead beast in half. The young blonde captain stands over his men, bathed in a brilliant blue aura. Grunting from the exertion, the captain grips his hilt tightly, scanning the shadows for the next attack. There is no time to breathe, as another horde of shrieking ghouls charges straight at them. Channeling raw energy into his blade, the captain's eye ignites with blue light as he readies his stance. Moving like a relentless blur, he executes a flurry of lethal strikes, shredding through the undead ranks in seconds. Severed limbs and black blood splatter across the snow right beside the cowering soldier, who shrieks in total panic. The captain barks at the paralyzed scout to pick up his spear, but the terrified soldier can only cry out that he's too frightened to move. Vlad curses under his breath, forcing himself to stay calm and figure out their next move before making any rash decisions. Realizing that pushing forward through the endless horde of undead is impossible, Vlad wonders if Sir Zaire is managing to hold his ground. Meanwhile, Sir Zaire unleashes a powerful circular sword strike, slicing through the surrounding ghouls in a flash of steel. Black blood splatters across Zaire's face as he holds his ground against the relentless assault. All around them, the rest of the men are overwhelmed and brutally seized by the ravenous corpses. Gritting his teeth in frustration, Zaire realizes that the sheer number of undead crawling out of the snow is endless. Raising his sword high, Zaire reflects that every trap is built with a specific purpose, even if he doesn't know who set this one up. Though the architect remains a mystery, he knows without a doubt exactly who this ambush was designed to destroy. A brilliant green aura begins to sizzle and burst from beneath his eye patch, igniting his latent power. Knowing there is no time left for hesitation, he surrounds himself in a towering burst of green aura. As the blue-eyed ghouls leap at him from every angle, Zaire readies his infused blade to channel a massive attack. His eye glows with intense energy as he prepares to unleash his full force. The blood-stained monsters lunge forward with gaping jaws, completely oblivious to the doom awaiting them. In a single devastating burst of green energy, Zaire obliterates the horde, slicing them into flying fragments. Seeing his incredible feat, the surviving men rejoice and gather around the knight, believing he will keep them safe. As the severed remains crumble to dust, Zaire maintains his combat stance amidst the lingering black mist. Zaire roars across the battlefield, calling out to Vlad of Skowara to fulfill his end of their pact. Shocked by the call, Vlad stabs an attacking ghoul and glances back toward the commander. While keeping the undead at bay, Vlad shouts back, asking what Sir Zaire needs him to do. Zaire commands Vlad to head back to the base immediately and hold out until he can rejoin them. Reaching out a bloodied hand, Zaire reminds Vlad of his primary duty, to defend Lord Joseph at all costs as promised. Vlad immediately responds with a firm shout of acknowledgement, knowing what must be done. Vlad dashes across the frozen ground calling for God, while the frightened scout desperately begs his captain to wait for him. Looking up at the night sky, Zaire offers a quick prayer that Vlad and his companions make it back to Lord Joseph safely. Standing firm with the remaining men, Zaire braces himself as heavy footsteps and low groans signal another wave of undead approaching. Spinning around with his sword glowing with aura, Zaire senses a dangerous presence approaching from behind. His eyes widen in shock as he catches sight of the figure standing in the shadows. Zaire lets out a heavy sigh, realizing with dread that he has arrived far too late. Standing before him is Roderick, who has been completely transformed into a ferocious, glowing-eyed undead beast leading a horde of monsters. Meanwhile, back at the main camp, Lord Joseph's grand tent sits quietly under the cold mountain sky. Inside, Joseph sits calmly at his desk, reviewing ancient documents by the faint light of a lantern. Suddenly, blood-curdling screams of panic and agony echo outside through the campsite. Listening to the frantic shrieks, Joseph lowers his head, wondering if an enemy attack has broken out. Before he can react, one of his officers, Borden, bursts into the tent in a frenzy. Joseph demands to know the cause of the uproar, but the trembling guard stammers, unable to form a sentence. Frowning in irritation, Joseph asks the man if he even bothered to check the situation before running inside. Borden desperately pleads that his sole priority was to ensure Lord Joseph's immediate safety. However, Joseph snaps back furiously, pointing out that Borden didn't even have the sense to bring his sword to protect him. Surprised, the guard looks down at his empty hip and gasps when he realizes his weapon is missing. Glaring coldly, Joseph snarls that if he possessed his brother's temper, he would have had him executed on the spot. Cowering in absolute terror, Borden bows his head and begs for mercy. At that moment, Father Andrea and several other followers rush into the tent to report on the crisis. Turning away from his incompetent guard, Joseph asks Father Andrea what is truly happening outside. Holding open his sacred scripture, Father Andrea gravely warns that a sinister evil has descended upon them. He presents his holy book, explaining that its pages were printed using pure divine ink. Joseph narrows his eyes in intense focus as he listens to the priest's alarming revelation. On the open pages, the printed words tremble violently like leaves, confirming the presence of an immense dark power. When Joseph asks if there is any way to eliminate the entity, Father Andrea regretfully admits that he is not an exorcist. The priest offers to use his holy power to hold the evil at bay, though he doubts it will hold for long. Hearing this, Joseph grows increasingly grim, knowing that none of their remaining knights possess an aura domain strong enough to turn the tide. Yet, Joseph realizes these remaining men are the only option he has left to rely on. Deciding not to waste any more time, Joseph commands everyone to get moving as he steps forward. But as soon as he steps outside into the freezing night, he pauses in shock at the ominous mist drifting through the camp. Sweating nervously, he stares intensely, trying to comprehend where this uncanny mist came from. Suddenly, blood-curdling screams ring out across the snow as soldiers fall to their knees, writhing in terror from terrifying hallucinations. Realizing the danger, Joseph immediately covers his face with a cloth to avoid breathing in the toxic air. As the priest covers his own mouth, Joseph questions if this unnatural mist is triggering these violent delusions. Glaring into the darkness, Joseph grits his teeth, knowing they've been caught completely off guard. Then, an eerie, distorted voice echoes out from the darkness, calling out for its child. An overwhelming pressure descends upon Joseph and his men, making them tremble violently where they stand. Through the haze, the twisted silhouette of a grotesque female spirit appears, wailing mournfully as she searches for her lost child. The priest and the knights freeze in sheer horror at the unnatural sight before them. Joseph keeps his composure, locking his gaze onto the terrifying entity without flinching. The wraith suddenly halts her movement, floating menacingly amidst the dense fog. With a sickening creak of her joints, she tilts her head upward and screeches into the empty air. She locks her sight straight onto Joseph's group, issuing a soft, spine-chilling gasp. Her dark eyes ignite with pink malice as she opens her jaw impossibly wide, roaring that she has finally found them. Calling Joseph her child, the vengeful spirit focuses all her malevolent energy directly on him. Her massive, razor-sharp claw cuts through the darkness as she reaches down to claim her target. Before her claws can strike, a brilliant burst of golden holy light erupts to block her path. Screaming in agonizing pain, the monstrous spirit recoils as the sacred aura burns into her form. Furious at being thwarted, the creature howls in rage for her sweet child. The priest clasps his hands in fervent prayer, pouring every ounce of his faith into casting the holy barrier. Right beside him, the young acolyte cries out in unison, channeling his own spiritual power into the ritual. Together, their holy power forms a massive golden sanctuary, shielding Joseph and the knights from the dark entity's assault. The enraged spectral figure claws frantically against the glowing holy barrier, her hands engulfed in dark flames. Observing the relentless assault, Joseph realizes that among them, only Zaire possesses the true strength needed to face such a monster. He looks down at Cade and Maxim lying unconscious on the ground, acknowledging that neither knight proved worthy of the task. Even backed by Father Andrea's divine blessing, they lacked the power to strike down the terrifying enemy. Screaming out in anguish for her child, the vengeful spirit continues to batter the barrier with raw hatred. Watching her intently, Joseph realizes that this manifestation isn't just a wild monster, but an active curse. As the monster's flaming claw presses against the barrier, he recognizes that this lethal magic was targeted specifically at him. A deep frown settles across his face as he wonders who could possibly be orchestrating such a sinister scheme. Suddenly, the young acolyte violently coughs up a spray of blood from the intense strain of maintaining the sacred ritual. Father Andrea continues his fervent prayers, urging Jean to stay strong and hold fast until the sun rises. Outside, the furious ghost thrusts her burning hands directly against the radiant golden shield. Tears streaming down his face, young Jean wipes the blood from his lips, struggling under the overwhelming toll. Pushing past his physical limits, the boy cries out his holy chants, forcing his sacred power to surge upward once more. The divine sanctuary flares brightly, maintaining a fragile shield for the survivors beneath the massive shadow of the dark spirit. Joseph notes with grim concern that the acolyte has reached his absolute limit, meaning their protective him will collapse very soon. Gloom takes hold of Joseph as he questions if this is truly the end, seeing no path to survive until dawn. But just as despair sets in, his eyes widen in sudden shock. High above the battlefield, a mysterious figure leaps through the dark night sky with a drawn blade, catching Joseph completely off guard. Sensing the sudden threat descending from above, the spectral monster snaps her head around in surprise. Diving straight down, the blonde youth swoops toward his target with his glowing eyes fixed on the entity. In his mind, his inner spirit warns him that the entity before them is animated entirely by a curse. As the spirit explains that a normal sword cannot cut through it, the youth urgently asks what he should do. When the spirit asks if he knows how to channel aura into his blade, the boy incredulously responds that he obviously cannot. The spirit then hints that there is still one last resort available, prompting the young warrior to ask what it is. Swirling with radiant energy, the spirit reveals his proposal to temporarily take control of the youth's body. A massive spectral entity looms over the young warrior, ready to channel its immense power through his body. Skeptical of such an unbelievable claim, the boy questions if it's even possible, while the spirit reassures him of its mastery over aura. The spirit warns that forcing aura through a foreign vessel could leave him completely paralyzed as violent electrical energy surges across his frame. Despite the spirit advising against such extreme danger, the young warrior refuses to back down, knowing failure against the monster means certain death. Acknowledging that embracing risk is the true path of a warrior, the spirit watches as the youth grips his glowing blade. Standing on the freezing battlefield, the boy gives his final go-ahead, prompting the spirit to ask if he is truly prepared. With glowing blue eyes full of unwavering resolve, the warrior remembers the sacred promise he swore to Joseph. He knows deep down in his heart that there is a duty he cannot afford to abandon. Stepping forward through the icy gale, his presence transforms as he prepares to entrust his body to the spirit. He makes it clear to the entity that he is offering his complete trust rather than unconditional allegiance. Honoring his fierce conviction, the ancient spirit agrees to respect his terms. Without a moment's hesitation, the warrior leaps down from above, aiming his sword directly at the ghastly creature below. Caught off guard, the demonic phantom shrieks in fury as the attacker falls upon it. As the intense spiritual pressure crushes down on him, the boy grunts in pain under the sudden strain. The spirit commands him to close his right eye immediately while the youth winces through the excruciating shock. A deafening bolt of lightning shatters the darkness, signaling the full activation of the spirit's authority. Understanding that this single strike will decide everything, the battle reaches its absolute climax. A tempestuous vortex of brilliant blue power erupts around him, dragging the battlefield directly into the spirit's realm. His eye ignites with blinding light as the ancient aura flows seamlessly through his body. Crackling high-voltage lightning surges across the edge of his blade, turning it into a divine weapon. The terrifying monster turns in sheer horror as it senses the overwhelming pressure radiating right behind it. Possessed by the spirit's incredible force, the warrior glides forward with cold, deadly precision. In the blink of an eye, he executes a devastating lightning-fast slash that cleaves straight through the entity. The vile creature screams in agonizing despair as its body is completely torn apart by the radiant strike. Watching from a distance, the spectators stand frozen in utter shock, completely stunned by the unbelievable display of power. Joseph watches intently, his sharp dark eye narrowing as he takes in the aftermath of the massive strike. Crackling blue electricity lingers around Vlad's eye as the tremendous power he channeled begins to recede. The heavy strain forces Vlad down, his knees crashing heavily onto the frozen ground with a painful thud. Residual aura violently surges through his nervous system, causing Vlad to throw back his head and scream in agony. Seeing his ally collapse in sudden pain, Joseph calls out Vlad's name in deep alarm. Vlad lies helpless on the cold snow, trembling violently as his body buckles under the severe backlash. Joseph quickly analyzes what just happened, recognizing that the boy had truly manifested the mark of genuine aura. He realizes that while Vlad achieved something miraculous, his untrained body is now paying an immense price. Meanwhile, the wretched ghoul refuses to stay down, its shadowy form twitching as it rasps out for its lost child. The ghastly monster drags itself across the ice, fixating its dark gaze on the immobilized boy. Without a second thought, Joseph dashes forward to protect Vlad while commanding the clergy to keep chanting their holy hymns. Reaching his fallen comrade, Joseph hoists Vlad up by the shoulder, urging him to hold on tight. However, the relentless ghoul lets out a terrifying cry, reaching out its clawed hand in desperation. Before they can pull away, the monster's undead grip latches tightly around Joseph's leg, sizzling with dark energy. Corrosive black mist burns into Joseph's skin, forcing an agonizing scream from his throat. Frustrated by his lack of physical power, Joseph grits his teeth in rage, unable to break free from the ghoul's grip. Suddenly, a powerful shout echoes over the chaotic battlefield, calling out to Lord Joseph. A massive hand reaches in from behind, firmly grabbing Joseph by the heavy fabric of his fur cloak. The burly guard bellows an apology for his insolence as he prepares to break them free. With a powerful heave, the guard tosses both Joseph and Vlad straight through the air away from the creature. The ghoul reaches upward in pure anguish, watching its targets fly beyond its grasp. Joseph and Vlad crash land onto the snowy ground right in front of the astonished priest. Recovering from the hard landing, Joseph admits with a smirk that he's never been so relieved by his guard's sudden actions. Despite his body being completely exhausted, Vlad forces his trembling hand forward and grips his sword's hilt. Determined to finish the fight, Vlad turns his gaze toward Father Andrea and asks the priest to bless his weapon. Sweating from sheer exhaustion, Vlad declares with absolute resolve that he must send this creature back to the underworld once and for all. Father Andrea silently looks at the young knight before agreeing to grant his heavy request. Slicing his own palm across the sharp blade, the priest willingly coats the steel in his holy blood. Presenting the bloodied weapon back to Vlad, Andrea assures him that this divine blessing will undoubtedly put an end to her existence. Vlad softly expresses his gratitude as his gloved fingers take hold of the hilt of the consecrated sword. Leaving the praying priest behind, Vlad turns around and firmly marches back toward his target. Standing tall over the crawling demon, Vlad points his radiant blade straight at her trembling form. Screaming through her shattered jaw, the wretched beast desperately begs Vlad to find her lost child. In that brief, fleeting moment, Vlad notices something profound hidden deep within her hollow gaze. He catches a sudden glimpse of the horrifying trauma that originally birthed this monstrous nightmare. He sees the memories of innocent women imprisoned in dark dungeon cells, crying out desperately for their stolen children. He witnesses the heartbreaking sight of helpless young children left lifeless on the freezing stone floor. A mother's tortured hand reaches out in agony, pleading frantically for her precious child to be returned. It was the tragic memory of a mother screaming in utter grief for the child she was powerless to save, forced to watch helplessly as her child's frail body slowly grew cold right before her eyes. Tears streamed down her human face as she shrieked in unbearable despair before being corrupted into a monster. Understanding her tragedy, Vlad gently drives his blessed sword down, praying that her tormented soul may finally rest in peace. As holy light consumes her, A single tear trickles down her face with her final lingering thought asking where her child had gone. Driving the blade firmly into the earth, Vlad stands silently amidst the quiet aftermath of the strike. A solitary tear trails down her blood-stained cheek as the demonic corruption finally fades away. As her faint whispers echo into the breaking dawn, the sun begins to rise over the snowy mountain peaks. Vlad drops to his knee, leaning heavily against his sword while bathed in the warm light of the new morning. Meanwhile, far away in a hidden sanctuary, a mysterious hooded figure channels dark magic over a smoking altar. A dark, sinister smile spreads across the figure's face from beneath his shadowy cowl. As the dark energy swirls between his palms, a nefarious new plot begins to take shape in the shadows. Suddenly, the dark energy swirling between his hands fades into nothingness. The sorcerer recoils in shock as he realizes his connection to the Overmind has been abruptly severed. Sitting hidden among the icy rocks, he frantically wonders who could have wiped out his forces. Before he can react, a chilling voice suddenly breaks the silence. The eye-patched knight steps into view, bathed in a brilliant green aura as he corners the puppet master. Terrified by the sheer pressure of the knight's aura, the hooded figure can only tremble in helpless panic. Moments later, the dark-haired lord approaches, asking if this was indeed the man manipulating the dead. Lifting the sorcerer's severed head by the hair, the knight confirms that the villain has been executed. The lord then ponders the mysterious wooden box recovered from the hideout, recognizing it as the source of the curse. The knight silently stands holding the heavy wooden chest under his arm. He observes mournfully that the container meant for the child ultimately became its final resting place. The lord instructs him to turn the box over to Father Andrea for a full investigation upon returning to Varna. Overlooking the vast camp, the lord solemnly declares that their expedition ended in complete failure. Even so, he remarks that despite the setback, their return journey back home will at least be lighter. Turning to his trusted commander, the lord asks if he sees any real potential in their newly recruited swordsman. With a subtle smirk, the lord confides that he believes he has finally found a true warrior to fight on his behalf. He envisions the boy's immense latent power, confident that he will one day outshine every other swordsman. Meanwhile, back in a quiet tent, the young swordsman wakes up looking utterly exhausted, stunned to learn he was out cold for 3 days. His internal spirit reminds him to be more cautious next time, noting how brutal the rebound from using that much aura was. The spirit points out how surprising it was that Lord Joseph waited for him to recover rather than leaving him behind like baggage. Realizing that Joseph actually seems to care for his well-being, the boy grips his sword and pushes himself out of bed. He heads toward the exit and pulls back the tent flap to check on the surroundings. Stepping outside, he looks around the peaceful, empty campsite, assuming the mercenaries fled after the previous night's terror. Suddenly, a familiar spearman runs toward him shouting with joyful relief that his captain is finally awake. When asked why he didn't run away with the rest, the spearman grins, admitting he only stayed because they were offered bonus pay. The spearman rambles endlessly, boasting about bringing his unconscious captain back to camp and returning to the death trap to rescue the knight, demanding full credit later. Tired of the endless chatter, the blonde youth waves his hand and promises to report his heroic actions just to shut him up. The soldier then passes along word that Sir Zaire is waiting in Lord Joseph's tent and wants to speak with him immediately. As the youth walks off, the spearman continues shouting reminders after him, earning a frustrated rebuke to shut his mouth. Heading deeper into the camp, he arrives at Lord Joseph's grand white tent displaying the noble family's banner. Inside, Lord Joseph pours a glass of fine red wine and asks if the young mercenary even knows how to drink such liquor. The boy calmly replies that he worked in a tavern back home, though high-grade alcohol like this was far beyond his reach. Swirling his bottle, Joseph arrogantly notes that this exquisite drink is a luxury reserved strictly for noblemen. He then expresses his sincere gratitude to the boy, acknowledging that he could have easily run away to save himself. When the youth points out that they had an agreement, Joseph nods, confirming their pact was built on mutual trust rather than forced loyalty. Internally, Joseph marvels at how faithfully the young warrior kept a mere verbal agreement, realizing he cannot afford to lose someone so talented. Looking at the young man with sharp eyes, the noble begins plotting a way to tie him down for good. Recalling the monstrous lightning-like power the boy displayed on the battlefield, Joseph knows he must pull out all the stops to keep him on his side. He slides the glass of wine across the table, declaring that it is now time to fulfill his end of the bargain with proper compensation. Standing under the emblem of his house, Joseph officially invites the young prodigy to join the prestigious Vaizid family. The boy sits in silence, stunned as he processes the life-changing offer laid out right in front of him. Sometime later, the group arrives at Varna, the grand capital territory ruled directly by Count Vaizid. After dismissing the remaining mercenaries, Joseph informs his men that they will stay in the city for a day so he can present his expedition report. Walking through the streets, the eye-patched knight catches the blonde youth nervously gawking at the tall buildings around him. He asks if this is his first time visiting Varna, and the boy timidly admits he has never ventured outside his small hometown before. Chuckling at his lack of experience, the knight teases him for being a total country bumpkin, annoying the youth. Taking pity on him, Lord Joseph grants the young soldier the rest of the day off to freely explore the city. The eye-patched knight sternly warns the kid not to get lost and commands him to meet them at City Hall by dusk. As the group walks ahead, the blonde youth glares at the knight's back, silently complaining about how annoying he is. When his inner voice points out that the knight actually seems to like him, the boy sarcastically mutters that any more affection from that scary man might actually kill him. Putting his complaints aside, Vlad decides to focus on the money he earned from the expedition, planning to treat himself to a delicious, hearty meal. He looks around the area, wondering what kind of local delicacies they have to offer. Before he can search for a place to eat, someone suddenly reaches out and grabs his arm. Vlad turns around in surprise, finding Jean, a young acolyte from the church, standing behind him. With a cheerful smile, Jean informs Vlad that Father Andrea is requesting a meeting with him if he isn't busy. Surprised by the unexpected summons, Vlad wonders why Father Andrea would want to see him. Jean leads him toward a towering cathedral that stands majestically under the bright sunlight. As they arrive at the base of the massive steps, Vlad stands beside Jean, marveling at the towering structure. He admits that even the grandest church he saw back in Skowara pales in comparison to this immense cathedral. Jean proudly explains that while Sturma serves as the political capital, Varna is the true religious heart of the territory. The young boy then asks Vlad to step inside and wait while he goes to fetch Father Andrea. Vlad steps inside and walks down the ornate carpet into the grand interior. Looking around at the magnificent architecture, Vlad is completely captivated by its beauty. In front of him stands a radiant altar, bathed in a brilliant golden light that fills the sanctuary. Standing before the magnificent altar, Vlad reflects on how people used to call him Lyman the Worshipper. Despite never having truly prayed in his life, the holy atmosphere makes him feel awkwardly self-conscious, secretly feeling as though he has somehow sinned just by standing there. Interrupting his thoughts, Father Andrea approaches him, apologizing for keeping him waiting. Vlad quickly bows his head respectfully, assuring the priest that it was no trouble at all and thanking him for the invitation. Father Andrea chuckles warmly at Vlad's polite response, putting the young man at ease. The priest then hands Vlad a small wooden object, prompting Vlad to curiously ask what it is. Father Andrea reveals that it is his official identification badge, leaving Vlad stunned as he holds the glowing token. The priest explains that while Lord Joseph could have granted him one, an identity card issued by the church holds far greater authority across the entire continent. As Vlad examines the wooden badge closer, something written on it suddenly catches his eye. He gasps in disbelief when he realizes that Father Andrea himself signed his name as his official guarantor. Placing a reassuring hand on Vlad's shoulder, Father Andrea kindly tells him to come to him whenever he runs into trouble. Father Andrea smiles warmly, declaring that from that moment on, he is officially Vlad's guarantor. Vlad looks up at him in stunned silence, barely able to speak the priest's name. A boy who grew up in the slums didn't even have an official birth record to his name. But now, backed by a respected guarantor, his name was officially entered into the registry of the world. Under the holy light of the cathedral, the moment Father Andrea gives his blessing, Vlad sheds his past identity. Bowing his head in deep reverence, he accepts his new destiny. He was no longer a nameless street rat, but Vlad of Skowara. As a horse-drawn carriage travels along the countryside, an explanation is given that Count Vaizid's domain spans 3 cities and 12 towns. Among them is Skowara, a thriving coastal trading hub filled with merchant ships and bustling docks. Then there is Varna, the grand spiritual and religious center of the territory. And finally, as they arrive near their destination, stands Sutramata, the majestic capital city of the region. The carriage rolls gracefully through the tall archway of the castle gates. They arrive outside an imposing noble estate, surrounded by luxury and high status. A stern, eye-patch-wearing commander strictly warns them that as guests of Lord Joseph, any foolish behavior will be seen as a grave insult. He orders them to stay put in the waiting area without wandering around like clueless country bumpkins, which they dutifully accept. He mentions that handmaidens will bring refreshments, but starts to offer a word of caution. Hearing this, Vlad and his companion exchange confused looks. Reconsidering his words, the commander turns away and flatly tells them not to eat a single bite, fearing embarrassing rumors if they gorge themselves like boars. When Vlad quietly asks if they really aren't allowed even one bite, the guard barks at him to shut up and keep his hands off. The heavy doors slam shut, leaving the two boys completely alone inside. Vlad's friend gasps in amazement as he takes in the lavish sitting room, marveling at the glowing chandelier and fine velvet couch. His friend remarks on how ridiculously wealthy the Vaizid family must be, and Vlad completely agrees. Suddenly, an unfamiliar voice speaks up from nearby, stating that he doesn't recognize either of them. Both boys turn in surprise as a heavy curtain flutters aside, revealing someone hiding in the room. The figure behind the curtain casually mentions that he was simply hoping to relax in secret. Stepping out from behind the drape, his footsteps echo softly across the floor. As the tall, dark-haired man walks past, Vlad glances over, immediately sensing a strangely familiar presence. Looking closer at the stranger's face, a sudden realization strikes Vlad. The stranger turns back and casually asks for their names with an easygoing smile. Vlad shudders, noticing the uncanny resemblance to someone he knows, yet feeling an entirely different aura from him. The man's intense presence feels sharp enough to slice through anyone with just a single glance. Completely flustered, Gott quickly introduces himself and mentions his service under Lord Joseph during the expedition. The man then turns his sharp gaze onto Vlad, asking for his identity next. Standing firm, Vlad calmly introduces himself as Vlad of Skowara. Hearing the name, the stranger admits he has never heard of Vlad before, yet finds something intriguing about him. He notes the lively determination in Vlad's eyes, impressed that the young boy shows no fear whatsoever. Smirking to himself, he realizes Joseph brought back a truly promising recruit and takes an immediate liking to Vlad. Reaching into his vest, the nobleman pulls out a handful of seeds. With a relaxed smile, he offers the handful of peanuts to Vlad. Vlad gazes down silently at the offered snacks. Rather than taking them, Vlad politely declines, explaining they were explicitly instructed not to eat anything. As Vlad reaffirms his refusal, Gott beside him freezes in utter horror. Gott panics internally, unable to believe Vlad just rejected an important figure of House Vaizid so bluntly. Left standing awkwardly with his peanuts, the nobleman sighs as the narrator notes Vlad's very first action at the manor, which was rejecting a simple offer of peanuts from none other than the Count's eldest son, Rutger. Munching on them himself, Rutger casually remarks that they were actually good peanuts while Gott remains petrified. Later, Count Vaizid scribbles notes onto a parchment upon hearing Vlad's name from his son. The Count addresses Joseph, pointing out that aside from Zaire, he hasn't had any exceptional warriors under his command. He promises a generous reward if Joseph can successfully shape the boy into a respectable knight for House Vaizid. Joseph bows respectfully, expressing his gratitude to his father. The Count reminds him that while his talents may lie outside sword fighting, he must never forget the expectations of House Vaizid. Submissively lowering his head, Joseph quietly accepts his father's stern reminder. The Count then checks in on his condition, asking how he is feeling physically. Joseph briefly responds that he is doing fine. Satisfied, the Count grants him leave, and Joseph bids his father farewell before exiting. As Joseph walks out, he limps noticeably, catching the attention of those remaining in the study. The Count silently observes his son's heavy gait as he departs. With every step, Joseph's pronounced limp reveals the painful toll of his recent ordeal. Ragma suggests sending medicine to aid Joseph's recovery, noting that Lady Oksana would appreciate the gesture as well. The Count agrees, acknowledging how deeply Lady Oksana cares for her son. Turning back to business, the Count asks Ragmus for his assessment of Joseph's report. Ragmus advises taking the report very seriously, given all the bizarre occurrences lately. Darkly, the Count declares that he will uncover whoever is behind this and eradicate their sinister presence from his lands. Ragmus brings up a report from Varna detailing strange incidents involving mind-controlled individuals. He explains that the spell used is a complex blend of dark necromancy and curses. This leads them to suspect that a master dark mage or a collaboration of mages is behind the operation. The Count muses that a secretive organization might be involved, which Ragmus confirms. Determined to take action, the Count grips his chair and stands up. He vows that House Vaizid will stand firm and stop anyone who dares oppose them. With burning intensity, he orders his advisor to locate the perpetrators immediately. Standing beneath the house emblem, his fury mounts over the threat posed to his son and his domain. Outside, the full moon shines brightly over the quiet estate as night deepens. Elsewhere in the mansion, Joseph enters a room and apologizes to his waiting companions for the long briefing. Recognizing one of the men, Joseph addresses Gott by name, prompting an enthusiastic response from the soldier. Joseph informs Gott that his reward will be revealed tomorrow and dismisses him to rest, though Gott internally complains about starving all day while waiting. Grudgingly accepting Joseph's order, Gott takes his leave, leaving Vlad alone with Joseph and his heavily armed knight. With the soldier gone, Joseph turns his full attention to Vlad, sitting back imperiously to begin their true conversation. Joseph brings up their arrangement, confirming that Vlad saved his life and agreed to serve him as a warrior. Standing firm, Vlad calmly confirms that those were indeed the conditions they agreed upon. Joseph notes Vlad's demand for freedom to accomplish a personal goal, which Vlad straightforwardly admits is true. Pointing out the contradiction between swearing service and wanting freedom, Joseph demands to resolve this issue before finalizing anything. He directly asks Vlad what grand task requires such freedom, offering to grant appropriate leeway if Vlad reveals his true goal. Vlad remains silent, his glowing blue eye intense beneath shadow as he weighs how much truth to disclose. Framed by the brilliant full moon behind him, Joseph waits silently in his chair for Vlad's answer. Vlad finally speaks, asking if Joseph knows of Godin of Gathar, the famed warrior surrounded by legendary tales. He specifically asks about the formidable knight known for resembling blue moonlight. Joseph is completely stunned internally, having previously assumed Vlad was just a talented kid. He marvels in disbelief at how Vlad could possibly possess knowledge of such legendary figures. Joseph asks with heightened gravity if Godin was truly the mysterious knight responsible for slaying the Smiling Rose. For Vlad, Godin is an unforgettable shadow, the villain who murdered his savior in cold blood. He was the monster who destroyed Vlad's world, a dark reality Vlad coldly confirms. Yet despite his intense hatred, Vlad inwardly acknowledges a desperate desire to become powerful like him. Hearing this heavy revelation, Joseph leans forward, clasping his hands together thoughtfully. Regretfully, Joseph admits that dealing with figures of that caliber is far beyond his family's sphere of influence. Vlad calmly accepts Joseph's admission without disappointment, having already anticipated this limitation. He recognizes that despite his status, Joseph is ultimately just a count's son with finite influence. Even so, Vlad respects Joseph's blunt honesty rather than making empty promises. Appreciating Vlad's candor, Joseph decides to adjust the terms of their agreement. Joseph formally proposes a 7-year contract to Vlad of Skowara, setting the parameters of their service. Vlad reacts with complete disbelief, unable to process the proposal he just heard. Joseph explains that setting aside his pride as a noble was a massive decision, emphasizing how significant this offer truly is. Vlad admits to himself that while he doesn't fully grasp noble traditions, he can sense that Joseph's choice is completely unprecedented for his family. Joseph offers a promise of a bright future in exchange for Vlad saving his life. He promises to provide food, clothing, and rigorous training over the next 7 years to turn Vlad into a world-class knight. The prospect of becoming a knight leaves Vlad completely stunned, his eyes widening in amazement. In return, Joseph demands Vlad's absolute allegiance, stipulating that he must obey every command and refrain from taking action against Godin. However, Joseph grants him permission to settle his affairs in the slums of Skowara, offering his assistance to make it happen. Vlad thinks back to Gemina, a girl currently staying at the convent whom he cares about. Realizing what returning to the slums entails, Vlad's expression turns deadly serious as he considers his next move. Joseph points out that returning to the slums with only a single sword isn't enough, reminding him that sharper weapons exist in the world. Joseph reassures Vlad that he has far more powerful political and financial weapons at his disposal to resolve the issue. With his hands folded beneath his chin, Joseph asks Vlad directly for his final decision. After Vlad agrees and departs, Joseph stares at his reflection in the dark window, quietly acknowledging the boy's impressive ambition. His knight steps forward to question why Joseph was so intent on recruiting Vlad when plenty of other talented youths exist. Joseph acknowledges his knight's point, agreeing that many young people possess raw potential. He notes, however, that realizing and developing that potential into true strength is an entirely different matter. The eye-patched knight asks directly if Joseph truly believes Vlad can live up to such high expectations. Joseph's eyes gleam with absolute confidence as he reflects on Vlad's true nature. Without a moment's hesitation, Joseph states that he is entirely certain of the boy's future. He recalls witnessing Vlad's terrifying combat potential firsthand during their deadly encounter. The knight cautions that Vlad is unpredictable and fiercely rebellious, warning that taming him won't be easy. Smirking, Joseph replies that 7 years under his knight's strict discipline will be more than enough time to leash and tame the wild boy. As the knight promises to give his all, Joseph remarks that the wildest horses shine the brightest once they are finally broken. Looking out into the night, Joseph reflects on how he initially viewed Vlad as nothing more than a wild wolf to be used for his own gain. Looking out the window at the bright full moon, Joseph realizes that this wild wolf isn't just looking for food. He is chasing after the moon itself. The next morning, the bright sun shines down on the grand estate, marking the beginning of a brand new day. Zaire leads Vlad into his new quarters, informing him that he will have the entire room mostly to himself. Staring at the spacious room, Vlad can hardly believe his eyes, asking in disbelief if all of this is truly his. Vlad happily notes that having a real bed means he no longer has to sleep on the cold dirt floor, calling the simple room a palace, which catches Zaire off guard. Remembering Vlad's harsh upbringing, Zaire admits he forgot Vlad came from the slums, noting that noble squires usually struggle to adjust to such basic quarters. Zaire assumes Vlad will adapt easily, but warns him to remain cautious and avoid making any mistakes, causing the young boy to flinch. Nervously sweating, Vlad wonders if this warning is about his previous refusal to accept peanuts from Lord Rutger. Dismissing the thought, Zaire sighs and remarks that Vlad rarely listens to him anyway, adding that he has already lectured him enough on that matter. Instructing Vlad to meet him at the training grounds after eating, Zaire explains they will continue their grueling twice-daily sparring routine. Suddenly, Zaire stops in his tracks as someone approaches, his attention instantly drawn to the doorway. A refined noblewoman in an elegant green dress steps forward, warmly addressing Zaire as her faithful knight. Zaire quickly whispers to Vlad that this is Lady Oksana, Lord Joseph's mother, instructing him to bow exactly as he was taught. Together, they offer their respectful greetings, wishing the noble lady a good morning as they bow low. Looking down at the young boy bowing before her, Lady Oksana asks if this is indeed the child everyone has been talking about. Zaire confirms her suspicion, proudly stating that Lord Joseph personally selected Vlad himself. Acknowledging the response, Lady Oksana gazes intently, her striking yellow eyes narrowing with curiosity. Feeling her intense gaze, Vlad carefully glances up, his bright blue eyes meeting hers. Upon seeing his face, Lady Oksana's expression softens into a gentle, welcoming smile. Caught off guard by her sudden warmth, Vlad instantly blushes bright red, feeling incredibly flustered. She expresses her deep gratitude to Vlad, thanking him for saving her son's life during the expedition. Blushing even harder, Vlad stammers out that he was merely doing his duty as a squire. Insisting that he deserves a proper reward, Lady Oksana tells him that his actions saved more than he could possibly imagine. Gently patting his blonde hair, she compliments his handsome features, noting how well they complement his blue eyes. As she playfully rubs his broad shoulders, she advises him to eat more and put on some weight, promising to have custom clothes tailored for him soon. Blushing furiously with a deep crimson face, the hesitant boy stammers out a nervous thank you to the noble lady. She offers him a warm, gentle smile in return, thoroughly amused by his adorable reaction. Dismissing him back to his duties, Lady Oksana bids him a pleasant day as she walks off with her attendants. Letting out a heavy sigh of relief, Zaire is immediately questioned by his companion, who wonders why he is acting so unusually flustered. Zaire admits he isn't quite sure himself, guessing that his nervousness stems from never having interacted with a noblewoman before. The knight reassures him that it went well for a first encounter, though he privately confesses that even he still feels awkward around Lady Oksana. Telling Zaire to go grab some food, the knight dismisses him, and the boy obediently agrees. Zaire heads into the bustling dining hall, where the loud chatter of other soldiers fills the massive room. Suddenly, a disgusting stream of spit drips down from an antagonist's mouth. The vile liquid lands with a sickening plop right into Zaire's bowl of soup. Zaire looks down at his ruined meal as two arrogant soldiers loom over him with malicious grins. The instigator mockingly apologizes, claiming he mistook the area for a trash bin because of an awful smell. The entire group bursts into obnoxious laughter, thoroughly enjoying their cruel attempt to humiliate the newcomer. But instead of shrinking back, Zaire's eyes begin to glow with a chilling, vibrant blue light as he glares up at them. Calmly scooping up a spoonful of the tainted soup, he flings it right onto the wall with a sharp splat. To their absolute shock, Zaire nonchalantly slurps the soup, noting to himself that this confrontation came sooner than expected. The bullies are left completely bewildered, sweating as they wonder why on earth the boy is acting so incredibly calm. Zaire recalls the knight's strict warning that his actions from now on will directly reflect on Lord Joseph's reputation. As he calmly chews his food, Zaire's mind races to find a way to teach these jerks a lesson without tarnishing his lord's honor. Annoyed by the lack of reaction, the bully mutters a threat about future hazing, only for Zaire to suddenly ask for his name. Caught completely off guard, the thug turns back with a confused expression, demanding to know what he just said. With an icy, glowing blue glare, Zaire repeats his question in a tone that sends a sudden chill through the air. Shuddering in pure terror, the bully begins to sweat profusely, unable to comprehend why this kid looks so incredibly intimidating. Stuttering out his name as Sovanen, the bully watches in fear as Zaire slowly rises from his chair. Staring forward with his radiant blue eyes, Zaire coldly declares that he will remember that name, leaving the bullies frozen in his wake. Meanwhile, at the Grand Training Grounds, a high-ranking noble and his advisor stroll down the stone pathway flanked by guards. The noble strides forward confidently as the rhythmic sounds of wooden training swords clashing echo through the air. Looking down at the courtyard, the noble notes that the squires seem incredibly busy with their sparring sessions today. Intrigued by the display, the noble decides he wants to stop and observe the training for a moment, to which his advisor quickly agrees. His sharp eyes narrow, focusing intently on one specific recruit down on the field. The noble questions if the young blonde boy standing with a wooden sword is indeed the recruit he has heard about. The advisor confirms that the boy matches the description, having heard reports of his distinct blonde hair. While the noble admits the boy looks respectable enough, the advisor suddenly spots something else and tries to draw his master's attention. Surprised by the sudden interruption, the noble turns to see what has caught his companion's eye. The advisor points out that someone else is secretly watching the squire's training from the sidelines. It turns out to be Zaire himself, peeking from behind a wall, clearly anxious about how his newest recruit will perform. Amused by Zaire's protective nature, the noble crosses his arms, eager to see what the boy can actually do. He watches closely, wanting to evaluate the true extent of the young blonde boy's skills. Instantly, the blonde recruit engages in a fierce clash, his wooden sword slamming hard against his opponent's weapon. He moves with incredible agility, leaping into the air and deflecting strikes from multiple opponents at once. With his glowing blue eyes locked on his target, he drives his sword down to force his opponent's guard open. The opponent grunts in frustration, struggling to keep up with the boy's overwhelming momentum. The advisor watches in awe, remarking on how absolutely fearless the young recruit is during combat. He points out that the boy doesn't hesitate for a second, even when facing an opponent who towers over him. However, the noble critically notes that the boy's movements are still rather clumsy, which surprises the advisor. Yet, the noble cannot help but smile, admitting that the boy possesses a rare spark that he deeply admires. He respects the boy's determination to actively apply everything he has been taught in a real fight. As Vlad continues to fight, he remembers a crucial piece of advice he was once given. The golden rule of combat echoes in his mind. All true swordsmanship must begin with proper footwork. With that thought, Vlad slides his foot firmly across the dirt, shifting his stance to unleash his next move. Vlad recalls the vital lesson to keep a close eye on his opponent's footwork as his foe swings downward. He knows that mastering the art of deception through his gaze and shoulder positioning is the key to victory. With a sudden burst of speed, Vlad darts right under the opponent's aggressive overhead slash. By manipulating his own posture, he can completely dictate how his enemy reacts. In a blur of motion, Vlad effortlessly weaves through the air, leaving his opponent swinging at empty space. The opponent is left sweating in panic as Vlad suddenly lunges right into his blind spot. With a decisive and fluid motion, Vlad delivers a devastating strike that sends his foe spinning into the air. Slumping to the ground in pain, the defeated warrior realizes too late that he was completely tricked by Vlad's feint. Before he can even process the defeat, Vlad mercilessly yanks him up by his hair. Looking down with cold, glowing eyes, Vlad demands to know if his captive is one of Sovanen's lackeys. He reminds the trembling man of how he was caught laughing at him in the dining hall just the day before. With a chilling expression, Vlad mockingly asks who has the last laugh now. Without hesitation, Vlad delivers a brutal punch straight to the man's face, sending blood flying. The other trainees watch in absolute horror, sweating as the sounds of the beating echo through the yard. Tension grips the entire crowd as they witness the sheer ruthlessness of Vlad's assault. An elderly observer watches with deep concern, questioning if such extreme brutality is truly necessary for a training session. However, the nobleman beside him coldly dismisses the worry, stating that a true knight must possess an unyielding heart. He adds that their instructor, Zaire, actually seems quite pleased with the display. Peering over the wall, the smirking instructor Zaire silently agrees with the nobleman's harsh assessment. Finally, One of the trainees runs forward, desperately screaming at Vlad to stop the relentless beating. He raises his voice, furiously demanding that Vlad halt his attack immediately. Vlad suddenly pauses, his blood-stained fist frozen mid-air as the shout registers. Slowly, he releases his tight grip, letting go of his opponent's hair. The battered trainee collapses to the dirt with a heavy thud, leaving Vlad standing tall under the bright sky. Looking back with an incredibly icy stare, Vlad calmly apologizes, claiming he simply got too focused on the fight. Sweat drips down the trainee's face as he shudders in absolute terror, unable to shake off the bone-chilling gaze Vlad just gave him. Walking away with heavy, deliberate steps, Vlad leaves a crowd of stunned trainees tending to their battered comrade. One of the standing trainees nervously glances back at Vlad's retreating figure, completely intimidated by his cold presence. With a bloody cheek and a chillingly calm expression, Vlad asks the trainee to apologize on his behalf, explaining that he simply can't help himself once he gets engrossed in battle, prompting the man to grit his teeth in anger. Taking another step forward, Vlad casually delivers a chilling warning, apologizing to the man in advance as well. Glowing with a menacing blue light in his eye, Vlad promises that when their turn comes, he won't be letting him off so easily. Flashbacks to their earlier spiteful encounters rise as Vlad mockingly tells him he'll call him to spit in his soup if it ever tastes too bland. Trembling with sheer rage and fear, the trainee realizes that Vlad is an absolute monster who cannot be reasoned with. Looking at Vlad's terrifying, blood-splattered smile, the trainee can only think that Lord Joseph has brought a truly rabid dog straight from the slums. Later at dinner, Vlad's companion mentions the rumors circulating among the servants about Vlad going around beating up the other squires. Happily munching on a sausage, Vlad completely ignores the gossip and casually asks his friend if he's enjoying his work in the stables. The friend proudly starts boasting about working for the prestigious house Veizid before suddenly jolting and realizing Vlad successfully derailed the conversation. Getting back on track, the friend warns Vlad that fighting on the estate is a crime, but Vlad simply shrugs it off, asking what the big deal is. Vlad bluntly reminds him that he was already a criminal to begin with, claiming he actually went easy on them, leaving his friend with a blank, defeated expression. Vlad justifies his actions by explaining that he only fights in private and never starts them, though his companion is far from convinced that makes it okay. Vlad explains that his violent reputation keeps annoying people from wasting his time, right as a timid-looking trainee approaches their table. The nervous newcomer introduces himself as Portly Canner, holding his food tray with a polite but anxious smile. Chewing on his food, Vlad shoots him a cold, unwelcoming glare and demands to know what he wants. As Portly stammers, Vlad bluntly tells him to either sit down or get lost, complaining that his hovering is going to give him indigestion. Instead of being offended, Portly's face completely lights up with hope as he asks if Vlad is actually letting him stay. Portly happily sits down and expresses his immense gratitude, completely missing the fact that Vlad's harsh words were actually a hint for him to go away. Portly sadly confesses that he has always been forced to eat alone, even resorting to eating in bathrooms. Trying to ignore the sob story, Vlad points out that he is trying to enjoy his precious sausage, which immediately sparks Portly's interest. Portly proudly explains that his family has raised livestock for generations and supplies all the meat and sausages to the estate. Having noticed Vlad asking for seconds earlier, Portly kindly offers to share some of his sausages with him. Vlad glares at Portly, asking with a stern face if he is seriously trying to bribe him with sausages. But the sheer abundance of high-quality meats and sausages hanging in the room is almost too dazzling to ignore. Portly explains that his father sends him far too much food for one person to finish alone. Vlad realizes that all these squires come from wealthy backgrounds, a stark contrast to his past life in the slums where he couldn't even dream of speaking to them. He decides that accepting the gesture could be a perfect opportunity to start building valuable connections. Putting on a friendly smile, Vlad asks Portly if they should start eating together from now on, leaving the other squire completely stunned. Overjoyed by the offer, Portly beams with excitement, asking if Vlad truly means it. Vlad pats Portly's shoulder, reassuring him that squires need to stick together, which makes Portly feel like he's in heaven. Vlad tries to convince himself that his decision isn't purely motivated by the delicious sausages. Meanwhile, heavy footsteps echo through the grand, polished corridors of the estate. Sir Zaire walks down the hall, thinking about how exhausting it is to train the new recruit while simultaneously serving Lord Joseph. He hopes he can finally get some rest once Cade and Maxim fully recover from their injuries. His thoughts are suddenly interrupted when another knight calls out his name. It is Sir Gregory, who jovially asks where Zaire is heading in such a rush. Zaire groans internally, greeting Gregory with a very clear lack of enthusiasm. Gregory laughs it off, playfully asking Zaire to at least try and hide his displeasure. Zaire bluntly responds that he is currently far too busy to chat. Gregory concedes, acknowledging that managing everything for Lord Joseph must indeed keep him occupied. Impatient, Zaire asks Gregory if there is a specific reason he stopped him. Gregory flatters him, saying a knight of Zaire's caliber highly deserves the honor of training a squire. Zaire tells him to worry about his own squire, highly suspicious of Gregory's sudden interest in Vlad. Gregory bursts into a loud guffaw, joking that he raised Portly too well and that the boy needs to lose weight, leaving Zaire confused about his point. Gregory finally brings up Vlad, calling him a bright young lad with a nervous grin. He praises Vlad's manly attitude and how he doesn't let anyone push him around, prompting an annoyed Zaire to demand he get to the point. Gregory chuckles, reminding Zaire that it would be undignified for knights to interfere in the personal affairs of squires. Gregory brings up that he is well aware of Vlad's growing friendship with Portly lately. Zaire scoffs in response, claiming that Vlad is far too full of himself to ever make any real friends. Gregory then asks Zaire if he could at least have Vlad keep an eye on Portly for him. He explains that Portly is his cousin's child, and since he doesn't want him getting bullied, he'd rather ask Zaire than any of the other knights. Zaire stares back coldly, asking if Gregory honestly expects him to do such a favor for free. With a confident grin, Gregory beats his chest and promises to owe Zaire a big favor in return if everything goes smoothly. Zaire mutters that Vlad rarely listens to his orders anyway, which only makes Gregory laugh and praise the boy's great potential. Even when Zaire insists that Vlad truly ignores every word he says, Gregory cheerfully declares that such a stubborn attitude means the boy will go very far in life. Meanwhile, back at the stables, a stable boy tells Vlad that his riding issues might not actually be his fault, pointing out that he can't even get near the horses. The stable boy explains that although these horses are highly trained and completely used to people, they inexplicably panic and flee the moment Vlad approaches them. He adds that it has nothing to do with Vlad's riding skills, as the entire stable crew has noticed this bizarre reaction. Vlad curses under his breath, realizing that this has unfortunately always been the case for him. He recalls how dogs, cats, and almost every other animal have despised him and fled in terror since he was a child. Vlad wonders in dread if horses are reacting to him in the exact same way. A sudden realization hits him, leaving him completely stunned. He remembers that he actually managed to ride Sir Zaire's horse during their frantic escape from the undead. The stable boy points out that even though Vlad wasn't the one steering, he still managed to sit on the horse that night. He notes that Zaire's steed is an incredibly expensive, high-quality horse, which gets Vlad thinking. Vlad groans in despair, imagining how ridiculous he would sound if he told Sir Zaire he can only ride luxury horses. He laments his situation, knowing how incredibly stubborn Zaire is about him mastering horseback riding. Their conversation is suddenly interrupted when a maid approaches them in the stable. She politely informs Vlad that Lady Oksana has requested his presence immediately. Vlad is taken aback by the sudden summons, questioning if the lady truly wants to see someone like him. Vlad is soon escorted into a breathtakingly lavish room filled with exquisite golden decor and fine furniture. Sitting elegantly before him, Lady Oksana remarks that no one would ever suspect Vlad had actually grown up in the slums. Lady Oksana compliments Vlad, noting how exceptionally well his new, elegant attire suits him, though he stands there completely stiff and tense. She instructs the tailor that the clothes shouldn't be too tight, pointing out that 17-year-old boys like Vlad still have plenty of room to grow, just as her son Joseph did during his own growth spurt. With a warm, gentle smile, she promises to have another set of custom clothes tailored for him once summer arrives. She kindly adds that wearing the appropriate attire for each passing season is essential for maintaining good health. Overwhelmed by her unexpected kindness, a blushing Vlad bows deeply and sincerely thanks Lady Oksana. She softly dismisses his thanks, stating that she is the one who should be eternally grateful to him for saving her son's life. Apologizing for interrupting his busy training schedule, she politely dismisses him, letting him know he is free to leave. Vlad respectfully bids her farewell, expressing his deep gratitude once more before turning to depart. The heavy door shuts with a sharp click behind Vlad as he steps out into the hallway, carrying his outer coat over his arm. Letting out a heavy sigh of relief, Vlad admits to himself that the suffocating atmosphere of the noble room made it hard to even breathe. He stares at his finely tailored sleeve, wondering just how expensive these garments are and noting that they fit so perfectly they almost feel completely foreign to him. Looking down at the other clothes draped over his arm, he bitterly reflects that those original garments weren't truly his to begin with either. As he walks down the quiet, sunlit hallway, Vlad laments that he just can't get used to this lifestyle, despite trying his absolute best to blend in ever since House Veizid took him in. Deep down, a persistent sense of alienation remains, leaving him with the constant feeling that he simply does not belong in this noble world. He feels an invisible weight growing heavier inside him, as if a profound burden is slowly crushing his very soul. Suddenly, the sharp, echoing sounds of physical blows catch his attention, causing him to stop in his tracks and look toward the window in surprise. Peering through the glass, he spots a group of trainees gathered in the courtyard below, where a violent beating is taking place. Down in the dirt, a brutal trainee unleashes a barrage of heavy punches, mockingly jeering at his victim for losing his edge and calling him a pig. The bully snarls with rage, demanding to know if his victim mistook his recent leniency for weakness. The helpless victim cowers on the ground, desperately shielding his face as the bully mockingly asks if he's happy about making a new little friend. Raising his fists, the aggressor continues his relentless assault, spitting out that filthy bastards always seem to naturally gravitate toward one another. The sickening sounds of the beating echo loudly up the stone walls of the academy, reaching all the way to the window where Vlad stands watching. Watching the cruelty unfold, Vlad coldly realizes that people are exactly the same everywhere, regardless of whether they are rich or poor. With his eyes glowing a fierce, icy blue, he bitterly concludes that the entire world is simply overrun with cruel cowards who take pleasure in tormenting those weaker than themselves. Deciding he has seen enough, Vlad swings his cloak over his shoulders with a sharp flap, ready to take action. Vlad prepares for action, holding up his old combat attire and deciding he must wear it once again to handle the situation. Under the dimly lit night sky, the story shifts to a quiet, multi-story wooden building where trouble is brewing. A firm, gloved hand knocks sharply against the wooden door, breaking the silence of the night. From inside, a voice nervously asks who is there, and Vlad calmly replies from the shadows that it is him. With a loud clunk, the door swings open to reveal a battered, bruised boy who is shocked to see Vlad standing there. Vlad stares back in silence, his glowing blue eyes fixed on the boy's heavily injured face. Wincing through his swollen eyes, the boy weakly asks what could have possibly brought Vlad to his door so late at night. Vlad bluntly states that he came to retrieve something, leaving the confused boy completely bewildered. Pointing his finger past the threshold, Vlad demands that the boy hand over a specific item. The boy is crestfallen to realize Vlad wants the entire hanging ham he was carefully saving, but Vlad simply confirms his demand. Letting out a heavy sigh, the boy laments that even if they couldn't be close friends, he had at least hoped they could get along. Looking up at Vlad's cold, glowing eyes, the boy sadly concludes that Vlad only sees him as an easy source of food, just like everyone else does. Looking down at his bruised cheek, the boy tries to find a silver lining in his lonely existence. Deciding that sharing a meal is still far better than eating in isolation, the boy submissively hands the heavy ham over. Taking the meat, Vlad tells him not to be sad, explaining that he is only taking this as fair compensation for what he is about to do. The boy blinks in utter confusion, completely unable to comprehend what Vlad means by compensation. Looking away, Vlad recalls the wise words of a noble knight he once knew. He remembers the core philosophy of a true knight: they must only accept offerings in exchange for a fair price. Vlad steps outside into the cool night, holding a wooden training sword as he faces a large, hostile gang waiting for him. Looking at the crowd, Vlad scoffs at the fact that 14 armed men have gathered to fight just one person, calling them more cowardly than slum dwellers. Enraged, the leader points aggressively at Vlad, telling him to shut his mouth and warning that his cockiness won't last long. Unbothered, Vlad beckons the gang forward with a wave of his hand, telling them to bring it on since he went through the trouble of coming outside. The leader's face contorts in pure rage, gritting his teeth at Vlad's absolute lack of fear. With a furious roar, the leader orders his men to crush Vlad as they all charge forward with their weapons drawn. Watching them rush in, a confident smirk spreads across Vlad's face as he quietly notes how glad he is that he changed into his combat clothes. With a chilling smile and glowing blue eyes, Vlad raises his sword, declaring that some blood is going to be spilled tonight. In an instant, his blade strikes, sending blood flying as his opponents are brutally knocked back one by one. The surrounding men gasp in sheer terror as they witness their comrade get effortlessly cut down before their eyes. The leader screams at his men not to back down, warning them that they just gave Vlad an opening, but the young warrior is already capitalizing on it with a massive slash. Desperate to regain control, the leader barks orders to block Vlad and keep him surrounded, but Vlad's movements are far too swift to pin down. One of the fighters looks on in disbelief, sweating as he realizes Vlad is completely different from the boy he saw sparring before. This level of skill makes absolutely no sense. He struggles to comprehend how someone who only began learning sword fighting 2 months ago could already possess such monstrous skill. Fearing a total rout, the furious leader threatens his own men, warning them that if anyone dares to draw back, he will personally execute them. The leader charges forward himself, but Vlad effortlessly slips past his guard with blinding speed. Looking back with a freezing gaze, Vlad calmly asks the man if he has ever even killed anyone before. Infuriated and unnerved, the leader screams in confusion as he swings his wooden sword with all his might. Vlad easily ducks beneath the massive horizontal swing, letting the blade pass harmlessly over his head. Vlad reflects on his time with the expeditionary forces, recalling how he used to think only of smashing his enemies with brute force. But now, he precisely smacks the leader's weapon aside with a perfectly timed counterstrike. He acknowledges that the grueling training he underwent with Zaire is finally starting to bear fruit as he moves with fluid grace. Remembering Zaire's advice, Vlad focuses on keeping his opponent completely trapped within the space he controls. The leader groans in pain, completely unable to break free from Vlad's suffocating pressure, as he curses the young swordsman. Before the leader can even react, Vlad's blade comes down with a sudden, heavy strike. Vlad realizes he finally understands the true essence of combat as he executes his next move. He confidently declares that this entire battlefield has now become his own personal zone and space. With a powerful sweep, Vlad shatters the leader's defense and sends him flying off balance. He has completely mastered his own flow, dictating the entire pace of the battle. The leader crashes heavily onto the stone floor with a painful thud, crying out in agony. Grimacing and shedding tears of pain, the defeated leader groans that his leg has been broken. Standing victoriously over his fallen foe, Vlad readies his sword with a sharp ring, prepared to end the fight once and for all. The defeated leader looks up in sheer terror, crying and sweating as he realizes his opponent is completely merciless. Gritting his teeth, Vlad tightly grips his sword, ready to deliver a final, brutal blow. With a sickening crunch, Vlad slams his weapon down, eliciting an agonizing scream from the fallen leader. The remaining lackeys can only watch in paralyzed shock, completely horrified by the display of raw power. Trembling uncontrollably, the defeated leader groans in agony, realizing how close he just came to death. Vlad towers over him like a grim reaper, his sword embedded in the ground just inches away from the man's neck. With his eyes glowing a cold, menacing blue, Vlad warns him to stay out of his sight and to stop bothering his friend. Terrified for his life, the leader frantically nods in agreement, knowing his opponent wasn't bluffing. Looking up at those glowing eyes, the leader realizes that Vlad was truly prepared to take his life. Turning away from his defeated foe, Vlad casually remarks that this beatdown should be more than enough to pay for the stolen ham. With a chilling glance, Vlad asks who wants to be next, inviting the remaining lackeys to continue the fight. The lackeys instantly flinch in pure dread, their confidence completely shattered by his overwhelming aura. Offering a terrifying smile, Vlad warns them that if they won't step forward, he will gladly bring the fight to them. He slowly advances, his looming presence casting a dark shadow over the terrified soldiers. Shaking like leaves, the men are completely paralyzed with fear as the monster approaches them. Screams of agony echo through the courtyard as Vlad ruthlessly dismantles the rest of the gang. From a high window, a mysterious figure silently observes the one-sided beatdown taking place below. Watching the display of skill, the dignified man with a well-groomed beard quietly mutters his approval. Meanwhile, inside the grand hall, the knights gather for their regular monthly meeting before the Lord. Though unofficial, the knights who support Rutger naturally align themselves on one side of the chamber. On the opposing side stand the faction of knights who pledge their loyalty to Joseph. And in the center are those who choose to remain neutral, caught between the two rival factions. Standing before the throne, a commander reads from a scroll, announcing the adjusted schedules due to Rutger's upcoming mission. This is Knight Commander Antilas, who oversees the administration and duties of the entire order. The Lord then introduces the next crucial agenda item, the distribution of the holy relics sent by the church. Glancing sideways, the commander senses a heavy wave of tension settling over the meeting room. Rutger's knights are visibly seething, their faces contorted with pure fury. Meanwhile, Joseph's supporters can barely hide their smug satisfaction, looking incredibly pleased with the current situation. It is hardly a surprise, given how long Joseph's knights have been forced to stand in Rutger's shadow, and a subtle smirk plays on the count's lips. Feeling a sudden gaze, the eye-patch-wearing knight looks back to find the count watching them from above. The count sits back with an air of absolute authority, offering a knowing and confident look. The knight is left bewildered, sweating as he wonders if the Count is actually smiling at them. With the agenda finished, the meeting is officially dismissed, and the knights are instructed to double-check their duties. Heavy footsteps echo through the grand hall as the knights begin to file out of the chamber. One of the disgruntled knights scoffs loudly, muttering insults about street dogs and how pedigree always reveals itself. Instead of getting angry, the eye-patch knight simply smirks at the pathetic attempt to get under his skin. This only makes the opposing knights fume even more, their faces twisting in silent rage. Urging his comrades to ignore him, one of them spits out that they shouldn't waste their time, hinting at the low quality of the eye-patch knight's squire. A jovial, fur-collared knight approaches, laughing heartily at how incredibly upset everyone is. When asked what he means, the fur-collared knight chuckles, pointing out that news of the incident has already spread throughout the entire estate. He reveals that Vlad got into a massive brawl with the other squires, leaving even the training instructor completely baffled on how to handle it. The eye-patch knight responds with mild amusement, dryly calling Vlad quite the troublemaker. He then strikes his chest in a respectful salute, thanking Sir Zaire for his help. He promises to return the favor as agreed, declaring that he doesn't mind even if the task proves to be a challenge. Zaire waves him off as he walks away, letting him know that he'll definitely keep that promise in mind. Left to his thoughts, Zaire smirks with pride, noting that he shouldn't be surprised by Vlad's actions since he was the one who trained him. He quietly reflects that causing a little chaos is the absolute least Vlad could do. Inside a well-lit room, a brand new set of steel chest armor sits on a wooden mannequin, with a chest of gear resting below it. The young lord explains that his father sent this armor as a gift for Vlad, leaving the other knights stunned that the Count himself would send such a present. The mustachioed knight is highly impressed, marveling at what an incredible honor it is for a mere squire to receive such high-quality gear. The eye-patch knight immediately recognizes the armor's material as orc hide, specifically from a rare gray orc, which the young lord calmly confirms. These formidable, muscular creatures are native only to the harsh, freezing climates of the extreme north. Because of their origin, wearing armor crafted from gray orc hide serves as a prestigious badge of honor, symbolizing a true northern warrior. Looking ahead with crossed arms, the young lord realizes just how desperately his father wants to recruit Vlad into their ranks. He notes that Vlad has already proven to be an incredible investment, gaining the Count's high esteem in a mere month. The eye-patch knight agrees, acknowledging that none of the other squires can even hope to compete with Vlad's rapid growth. Word of Vlad's impressive exploits has already spread, becoming the main topic of gossip among the knights. Knowing they cannot afford to sit idly by, the young lord raises a sealed letter, signaling that it is time to make their next move. Intrigued by the document, the knight asks what the mysterious letter is about. With a knowing smirk, the young lord reveals that the letter contains the key to their next crucial mission. Upon reviewing the contents, the eye-patch knight realizes this is far from a standard social invitation. The young lord looks at him with an intense gaze, asking if he is willing to accept the high-stakes proposal. The knight readily agrees, admitting he has been waiting for a real challenge and is eager to move on from supervising Vlad. Pleased with the answer, the young lord declares the matter officially settled. He proudly announces that their next destination is the prominent city of Dermar. With their objective clear, the group stands ready to embark on the journey ahead. Soon, their carriage rattles along a scenic road, cutting through vibrant green fields under a brilliant sun. As they travel, the young lord explains that Dermar is famous for its lemons, a rare treat for northerners who rarely get to enjoy fresh fruit. He adds that the city also serves as a vital gateway to the central region, making it highly strategic for the north. Vlad listens intently, asking if the strategic importance is the reason why Sir Zaire decided to go there. The young lord confirms his suspicion, noting that ongoing crises always yield the best opportunities, particularly when you aren't directly involved. He explains that House Heinel is currently torn apart by a succession dispute, and their invitation is actually a desperate plea for assistance. Hearing this, Vlad can't help but feel overwhelmed by how incredibly complex and cutthroat the world of nobility truly is. The young lord points out that it is ultimately a ruthless battle for control over Dermar, fought even against one's own flesh and blood. With a cynical look, he concludes that family betrayal is a tradition as ancient as the nobility itself. Alicia was the rightful heir to the prestigious House of Heinel, but her path to succession was far from smooth. Her own uncle, Endra Heinel, maliciously claimed that Alicia was actually born from an illegitimate relationship. Endra was fully convinced that the title of Baron of Heinel would easily fall into his hands if Alicia were simply out of the picture. Despite being the sole child of the previous Baron, she lacked the political power to defend herself simply because she was a woman. To settle this dispute, they turned to a traditional method of resolving noble conflicts. They ultimately agreed to hold a formal duel under the watch of the church to prove her legitimacy once and for all. The young lord reflects on his relationship with Alicia, noting that they aren't actually close at all. She is more distant than a third cousin, yet that tenuous thread of kinship was enough for her to seek out his aid. Joseph explains that this is a golden opportunity to secure a future favor from House Heinel, a plan his father fully endorsed. Looking out the window, the young blonde squire finds the situation quite impressive. It turns out the head of the family specifically hired the formidable knight Zaire to champion their cause and defend their honor. Noticing the gaze, Zaire glares back, warning the boy not to look at him with such impudence. Zaire angrily questions why a mere squire gets to sit comfortably inside the carriage while a full knight has to ride outside on horseback. The blonde squire looks down in deep shame, apologetically addressing Sir Zaire. Zaire fumes, pointing out that the boy has no issues going around and beating up other squires. Yet, despite his combat skills, the boy still hasn't even learned how to properly ride a horse. As the knight laments wasting his time on a fool, the boy weakly mutters that he can ride expensive horses. This only angers Zaire further, who bellows that any horse that expensive is worth far more than the boy himself. Suddenly, the boy feels a strange, rapid thumping in his chest. He wonders what is wrong with him, as his heart has been racing inexplicably lately. He questions if these sudden palpitations are just a reaction to Sir Zaire's constant scolding. He reasons that fear of the knight's wrath would certainly make the most sense. Yet, he notes that while Lord Joseph speaks to him in a constant, gentle manner, Sir Zaire seems to do nothing but yell and scold him at every single turn. Before he can dwell on it further, a sudden rumble shakes the carriage, catching him off guard. The intense shaking of the ground makes everyone wonder if they are experiencing a sudden, massive earthquake. One of the guards nervously confirms that the very earth beneath them is trembling violently. The violent tremors intensify, causing the carriages to sway dangerously on the uneven road. Sensing immediate danger, the lead knight commands the entire escort to halt and dismount immediately. Without hesitation, the soldiers leap from their saddles to secure their footing on the unstable ground. Inside the carriage, the knight curses as he kicks the door open to escape the confined space. He quickly grabs Lord Joseph, pulling him out of the shaking carriage to safety. Lord Joseph can only stare in silent shock, completely caught off guard by the sudden chaos. However, Joseph calmly reassures his protector that there is no need to panic, leaving the young knight utterly bewildered. As the shaking subsides, the mustachioed guard lets out a sigh of relief, believing the danger has passed. While the blonde knight admits it was his first time experiencing an earthquake, Joseph grimly corrects him. Joseph points toward the distance, directing the knight's attention to a bizarre trail carved into the landscape. The ground continues to swell and burst open, revealing massive, freshly turned mounds of earth snaking through the fields. Emerging from the dirt is a colossal, horrifying deathworm lined with rows of razor-sharp teeth. Joseph explains that this monstrous creature is actually a remnant left behind by a fallen dragon. The young knight stands frozen in awe and terror as he gazes up at the legendary beast. He repeats the words in disbelief, trying to comprehend the sheer scale of a dragon's remnant. Instead of showing fear, a confident smirk slowly forms on his face. He can't help but admire the creature, quietly calling the terrifying sight magnificent. Sometime later, the group finally arrives at Dermar, the sole city belonging to House Heinel. They make their way up the grand steps of the mansion, leaving their carriage parked in the courtyard. Lord Joseph turns to Vlad and tells him he is free to do whatever he pleases, which catches Vlad by surprise. Joseph instructs him to take God along for a stroll around the city to gather as much information as possible. Vlad stands there bewildered, wondering if he is truly allowed such freedom in a new territory. When Joseph asks if there is an issue, Vlad quickly and stammeringly assures him that he has no objections at all. Joseph looks at Vlad with a piercing, serious gaze, telling him to deeply consider the true reason he was brought along on this journey. He explains that witnessing an honor duel is a rare opportunity, especially when it takes the form of an intense group battle. This collective clash means skilled knights from vastly different backgrounds have all gathered in one place to showcase their abilities. Joseph expresses his desire for Vlad to closely observe and learn from the diverse fighting styles on display. He emphasizes that experiencing a battle firsthand leaves a far deeper impression than merely hearing about it multiple times. Since Joseph has committed to training Vlad to the absolute best of his abilities, he intends to expose the young squire to as many diverse experiences as possible. The veteran knight warns Vlad not to go get himself injured, reminding him they still have a warm-up sparring session scheduled for that evening. Vlad dismisses the concern with a sigh, insisting he isn't foolish enough to get into unnecessary trouble. However, the knight bluntly points out that Vlad has already lost his trust, teasingly questioning what kind of squire can't even ride a horse. Joseph instructs Vlad to report his daily activities every evening and to immediately flag anything that seems out of the ordinary. Vlad respectfully acknowledges the command, promising to keep a close eye on his surroundings. Realizing he hasn't had any personal free time in ages, Vlad decides to take a quiet stroll and explore the area. As he scans his surroundings, he notes that this place is notably smaller than the Grand Vaizid estate he is used to. He also notices the signs of age wearing on the walls, wondering if the residents neglect the maintenance of their buildings. Recalling that the city is famous for its lemon trade, Vlad speculates that perhaps business has been declining recently. Suddenly, a strange resonance causes his sword to hum and vibrate intensely in his hand. An unexpected sense of familiarity washes over him, making him realize he might have been to this very location before. Looking out, his eyes lock onto a distinct, withered tree standing solitary atop a nearby hill. With a soft smile, Vlad decides that he needs to find a quiet place where he can offer a prayer. He recalls the mystical contract of exchanging his sword skills to reclaim his lost memories. Vlad resolves that it is finally time to start giving back in return for everything he has been granted. Meanwhile, bright beams of sunlight stream through the towering windows of a magnificent hall. Inside, a voice warmly welcomes Joseph, thanking him for traveling such a long distance to meet them. Joseph politely responds that any threat to his kin is a threat to himself, declaring that no duty is greater than protecting one's own blood. He addresses the noblewoman sitting before him on the throne, formally greeting Lady Alicia. Joseph points out that the Count of Vaizid has already given his consent, leaving the final decision entirely up to Lady Alicia. Clenching her hands tightly in her lap, Lady Alicia calmly announces that she has already made up her mind to respect the Count's wishes. However, she immediately follows up her agreement with a quiet, lingering condition. She boldly declares that this arrangement will only stand if she emerges victorious in the upcoming duel. Joseph remains completely unfazed, assuring her with absolute confidence that there is no reason for her to worry. He proudly boasts that the legendary sword of Vaizid has always served as an absolute guarantee of triumph. Standing tall with a smug smirk, Joseph extends his hand, fully confident in his family's ultimate superiority. Meanwhile, the warm glow of the setting sun bathes the grand estate, signaling the end of a tense meeting. As they descend the grand staircase, the men discuss Alicia, noting that she is definitely no pushover and must be watched closely. They acknowledge her natural leadership qualities, amazed by how she managed to remain perfectly composed during such a crisis. The leader agrees, noting that she hasn't relinquished her control over the situation in the slightest. Yet, with a cold and calculating gaze, he asserts that her strength won't affect their master plan at all. Standing beneath the golden glow of a massive tree, the knight muses that in the end, memories are all that truly remain. Looking out over the headstones, he realizes this obsession with leaving a mark is human nature's attempt to endure beyond death. He gazes upon a weathered tombstone marked with a tree emblem, reflecting on how people treat these markers like permanent scars. Through these physical remnants, people return to recall the cherished moments of days long gone by. A somber expression crosses his face as he admits he wishes his own mother had left behind a monument like this for him. Kneeling down beside the untended grave, he notices that no one has cared for this resting place in a very long time. Suddenly, an internal voice speaks up, clarifying that it hadn't said a word, leaving the knight slightly flustered. Smirking slightly, the knight invites the voice inside him to look around all at once, revealing he even skipped mandatory night training just to visit this spot. Unsheathing his sword, he silently offers his gratitude to the presence sharing his mind. He plants his blade into the earth and bows his head in a solemn, respectful knight's prayer before the tombstone. Shadows fall over him as he remains motionless, resting his forehead against the pommel of his sword in deep reverence. Floating above, the entity inside him recalls that the golden tree used to be much smaller in the past, struggling to place when that memory was. Looking down at the scene where a spectral figure stands beside the kneeling knight, the spirit feels a lingering sensation that it once stood right here beside someone. Suddenly, a wave of shock hits the entity as a strange recognition ripples through its consciousness. The entity realizes that the powerful presence gazing down at them from above seems to recognize who it is. Hearing this revelation, the blonde knight blinks in complete confusion, questioning what the voice means. The spirit asks the knight for permission to temporarily take control of his physical body. Surprised by the request, the knight quickly agrees, telling the spirit to give him just a second to prepare. Exhaling a deep breath, The knight closes his eyes and prepares to let the spirit take over. Instantly, his eyes snap open as brilliant blue energy surges through his gaze. Overflowing aura erupts from his body as the spirit fully manifests its power through the knight's vessel. A colossal wave of divine blue energy blasts outward across the entire graveyard, altering the atmosphere. Caught completely off guard by the sheer magnitude of the aura, the knight gasps in shock at what is happening. High above in the branches of the ancient tree, a massive, ancient white snake spirit reveals its glowing blue eyes to the knight below. Looking up at the majestic entity coiled around the tree, the voice confirms that the creature before them is indeed a powerful spirit. The giant white snake spirit glares down with piercing, luminous blue eyes, hissing softly. The young knight sweated anxiously as he stared at the mythical serpent, bewildered to encounter yet another divine entity. As the massive snake peered right toward him, the voice within revealed that the creature was actually sensing its presence inside his body. Trembling slightly, the squire watched in suspense as the gigantic snake slowly slithered down the ancient trunk. Closing his eyes in exasperation, he doubted the inner voice's calm claim that the massive beast wouldn't bite. Suddenly, a mysterious blue spark ignited within his right eye as a realization dawned on him. Looking closer at the entity, he realized that despite its immense aura, it harbored no hostility toward him. A soothing, spring-like warmth washed over the knight as the gentle spirit settled serenely beside him. Before he could absorb the moment, a woman carrying a cleaning bucket approached from behind and demanded to know how he got there. Setting her gaze upon him, the blue-haired maid sternly reminded him that the cemetery was strictly reserved for the Hainel family. Sheathing his weapon nervously, he apologized and claimed he was only searching for a peaceful spot to pray. The woman raised an eyebrow in sharp disbelief, questioning his excuse about praying in a private tomb. To prove his innocence, he quickly pulled out his wooden identification token, identifying himself as Sir Jair's squire. She crossed her arms while inspecting his badge, eventually conceding that he didn't seem suspicious. Letting out a sigh of relief, he offered a polite smile and thanked her for believing him. However, an awkward, heavy silence immediately fell over the pair as they stood opposite each other in the open yard. He panicked internally, worrying if standing near noble headstones was considered a grave offense. He realized that if she reported this incident, it might drag Sir Joseph into unnecessary trouble. A terrifying image of the eye-patch knight cracking his knuckles in rage flashed through his mind. Knowing he would be severely punished if she complained, he decided he had to win her over at all costs. Reaching his hand out, he abruptly asked if she needed help with her chores, startling her. Taking her for a groundskeeper maid, he inquired if she was there to clean the family tombs. He casually mentioned that he had already swept away the heavy layer of fallen leaves around the headstones. Surprised by his words, the blue-haired woman turned around to ask if he truly cleaned the area himself. Standing beside the grand tombstone, he explained that tidying the grounds was the least he could do to honor the estate's ancestors. Offering a charming smile, he reassures her that he will handle cleaning the tombstone himself. Nervously clutching his rag, he asks if she could kindly overlook his actions without telling anyone. He warns that Sir Jair would stir up trouble if he found out, catching the young woman completely off guard. Rather than getting angry, a playful smirk creeps onto her lips. She teasingly turns away, declaring that her silence will depend entirely on how spotless he makes the monument. Biting his lip in frustration, he inwardly grumbles about how pretty girls always make things difficult. Left with no choice, he kneels down and begins frantically scrubbing the tombstone under her watchful eye. Unable to contain her amusement at his intense scrubbing, she covers her mouth to muffle a giggle. Under the golden dusk light, autumn leaves gently blow past as he continues working to make the grave shine. The next day, loud clashing sounds ring out across the estate's courtyard under a clear sky. Peeking from behind a stone wall, the young man's eyes widen in absolute astonishment. Before him, two heavily armored knights collide in a brutal sparring match with explosive force. Crouching in the shadows, he marvels at their raw strength while overhearing someone identify the fighters. He watches the ferocious mustached warrior swing his blade, realizing a single blow like that could shatter bones. Witnessing such destructive power, he understands why that warrior is feared as the warthog of the central region. However, he is even more impressed by Sir Pablo, whose flawless shield technique effortlessly deflects every incoming strike. He can barely believe that a mere warm-up session before tomorrow's duel could be fought with such deadly intensity. A sudden wave of pressure hits him as he wonders if he truly needs to become that powerful just to be a knight. He is reminded that even the carefree Sir Brodan holds the official title of a knight. He quietly admits to himself that despite holding the same title, The difference in skill between knights is night and day. Reflecting back on his time in Show era, he realizes how naive he truly was about the world of swordsmanship. Staring at the ground, he finally gains a realistic understanding of where his current strength ranks in this vast world. Letting out a heavy sigh, he acknowledges that he still has a long and difficult road ahead of him. Soon, the fateful day of the duel arrives, marked by the grand, sunlit interior of the estate hall. Preparing himself for what is to come, he tightly pulls the leather straps of his armor into place. He asks his squire to tighten his armor a bit more, and the blonde youth promptly pulls the straps into place. As he helps adjust the gear, the young squire glances nervously to the side with anxious eyes. Across the room stands the scheming uncle, smugly folding his arms alongside his grinning followers as they plot to steal the inheritance. This arrogant noble is none other than Endel Haenel, the man seeking to strip his nephew of his rightful succession. The veteran knight advises the boy to watch the upcoming duel closely, emphasizing that a battle between earnest knights is a rare lesson. He gently reassures his young attendant, telling him there is no need to feel so anxious about what transpired yesterday. Surprised that his inner turmoil was so easily read, the blonde youth recoils in shock. The knight chuckles at his reaction, noting that his anxiety was written plain as day all over his face. In truth, the young boy was deeply shaken after secretly watching the terrifying clash of the estate's top knights. To an inexperienced fighter like him, the immense strength and skill displayed by those elite swordsmen felt completely monstrous. His mentor wisely reminds him that a child must learn to walk before they can run, urging him not to rush his growth. He adds that the higher one sets their goals, the longer and harder the path ahead will naturally be. Taking the heartfelt advice to heart, the young knight quietly bows his head in agreement. Suddenly, a thunderous voice echoes across the hall, loudly ordering everyone present to pay their respects. The massive wooden doors of the grand hall creak open wide, revealing a bright halo of light. The boy suddenly remembers that he has never seen the true master of Haenel, knowing only rumors that they were quite young. The sharp, rhythmic clacking of elegant shoes echoes softly against the stone floor. As the figure enters, the young man turns to look and instantly breaks out into a cold sweat. The herald grandly announces the arrival of Lady Alyssa Haenel, the stunning blue-haired mistress of the house. Realizing that the noble lady he accidentally insulted earlier is the lord of the house, the boy crumbles in hilarious despair. Flanked by her personal guard, Lady Alyssa walks gracefully down the central carpet toward her throne. As she walks past, Alyssa shoots a sharp, knowing side glance directly at the boy, making him flinch in terror. Her icy blue eyes emit an intimidating chill that freezes him right in his tracks. Panic surges through him as he frantically bows low, terrified that she recognized him. With a faint, satisfied smirk, Alyssa glides past, leaving the petrified squire bowing deeply in total dread. Taking her place at the head of the hall, Lady Alicia sits upon her high throne with an imposing aura, commanding the attention of everyone present. The holy priest steps forward to address the court, officially opening the proceedings and praying for the son's blessing upon the impending duel. As Alicia looks down with cold determination, Lord Endra wears a confident smirk, signaling that a high-stakes battle for dominance is about to begin. The chosen combatants from both factions line up opposite one another, preparing for what promises to be a ruthless test of strength and honor. An empty throne bathed in eerie blue light symbolizes the heavy burden and duties of nobility, a weight far too cold for ordinary hearts. Unwilling to let her loyal knight suffer pointlessly, Alicia's white handkerchief flutters through the air to call an end to the fight. Desperate to prevent further harm, Alicia cries out from her seat, commanding the duel to stop immediately. Severely wounded and covered in cuts, Commander Duncan breathes heavily while struggling to stay upright on his sword. Refusing to give up, the battered old commander grits his teeth and stubbornly insists he is not finished yet. However, the priest steps in to inform Duncan that because his master threw in her handkerchief, he must admit defeat. Standing over his exhausted opponent, Sir Charles patronizingly praises the commander for an admirable fight. Devastated by his loss, Duncan hangs his head in deep shame, questioning whether he can still consider himself a true commander. He remembers training Charles in hopes of making him a future guardian to protect the family. He reflects bitterly on how he never imagined his pupil would use those very sword skills to turn against his own master. Clenching his jaw tightly, the old warrior suffers the agonizing pain of defeat and betrayal. The priest loudly announces Sir Charles as the winner of the first round, awarding the victory to Lord Endra. Lord Endra chuckles smugly alongside his allies, thoroughly enjoying their successful start. The priest then summons the next pair of family representatives to step forward into the arena. Before they begin, the priest strictly reminds the fighters that the use of aura is strictly forbidden. He clarifies that the duel will only conclude upon surrender or when a knight suffers a disabling injury. Before taking his stance, the dark-haired knight casts a quick glance back toward his young squire. Pointing near his eyes, the veteran knight quietly tells the boy to watch carefully and learn. The young squire gasps in surprise, realizing his master is about to turn the upcoming duel into a lesson. Raising his sword vertically in front of his face, the dark-haired knight announces that class is now in session. As his giant opponent lunges forward with a heavy strike, the master calmly decides to use the fierce warrior as his teaching aid. Slipping past the lethal strike with refined footwork, Zaire prepares to shift the momentum. Colin roars loudly as he swings his sword again, but Zaire smoothly glides out of harm's way. Remaining completely unfazed, the master watches his opponent's wild motions with calm precision. Colin mistakenly thinks he barely missed and remains confident that victory is within his reach. Driven by urgency, Colin swings his heavy blade overhead even faster to overwhelm his target. Pouring all his strength into another wide arc, Colin tries desperately to crush the retreating master. Zaire easily steps off the line of attack once more, allowing Colin's force to pass harmlessly by. Ducking low beneath the deadly arc, Zaire carefully tracks every movement of Colin's weapon. From above, Zaire effortlessly circles his opponent, turning Colin's furious assault into a display of futility. Watching from the sidelines, an arrogant noble misinterprets the fight, believing Colin has cornered Zaire. Meanwhile, a seasoned knight stands in serious silence, recognizing what is truly happening in the arena. He scoffs at the ignorant spectators, knowing that Zaire is actually taking complete control of the duel. He realizes that Colin himself must be feeling the growing sense of dread with every missed swing. Sweat breaks across Colin's furious face as he internally rages over why his sword cannot touch Zaire. Zaire offers a calm, mockingly casual commentary as he steps aside like a matador. Enraged by the taunt, Colin lunges forward in a furious blind charge with his blade raised high. Slipping beneath the downward blow, Zaire steps directly into Colin's guard to deliver the counter. With his eye gleaming with sharp intent, Zaire prepares to initiate the core lesson of the battle. Seeing the pivotal moment unfold, the young apprentice focuses intensely on his master's technique. Zaire delivers a thunderous strike to Colin's upper body, shattering his stance in a single hit. Colin's eyes widen in sheer astonishment as his attack is completely broken apart. Without giving his foe a moment to recover, Zaire relentlessly drives his momentum forward. Gasping in shock, Colin feels his offense collapse as the physical impact hits home. Colin cries out as he is thrown back, while Zaire calmly maintains total mastery over the floor. The apprentice observes in amazement as Zaire perfectly demonstrates how to force an opening against an aggressive opponent. By expertly parrying the incoming strike, Zaire forced Colin to overextend and leave his posture completely exposed. This was the ultimate demonstration of a flawless counterattack. Holding his blade with absolute precision, Zaire stood unshakable, having completely taken control of the fight. Watching from the side, the young apprentice realizes that a counter allows a swordsman to turn an enemy's own aggression against them. The heavy collision of steel echoes across the arena as the duel reaches its sudden climax. Zaire stands menacingly over Colin, who falls to his knees, utterly defeated. Gasping for air and soaked in sweat, Colin realizes with horror that Zaire operates on a level far beyond his reach. To Colin, Zaire feels like an imposing mountain, an obstacle so grand he could never hope to scale it. Crushed by the sheer gap in power, Colin bows his head and admits his defeat. As Sir Zaire is declared the victor, Lady Alicia exhales a deep sigh of relief, holding her hand over her chest. In contrast, the spectators from the rival side click their tongues in bitter disappointment. Zaire silently walks off the floor with calm composure, leaving his broken opponent behind. Turning to his apprentice, Zaire casually asks if he managed to observe every detail of the move. With renewed focus, the young warrior nods appreciatively, eager to integrate the lesson. The herald then announces the start of the final duel, bringing Zuber and Pablo to face one another. Pablo steps forward with solemn honor, formalizing his entrance as Pablo of Arnstein. Zuber responds with a mocking smirk, pointing out that there is no need for introductions between old acquaintances. Ignoring the taunt, Pablo maintains a stern, unflinching stare on his opponent. Zuber lazily waves a hand back, acknowledging Pablo of Arnstein while taking his place. Observing from the sideline, the apprentice admits that Lady Alicia managed to enlist remarkably formidable knights. He quickly gauges their power, realizing that while Pablo matches Colin, Zuber is on a whole different level. Before taking his stance, Zuber subtly glances over toward the royal dais. Noticing his unexpected stare, Lady Alicia tilts her head in silent confusion. Without warning, Zuber dramatically drops into a deep, sweeping bow before the nobility. The young lord on the throne stares in utter shock, completely bewildered by Zuber's theatrical display. Sweating in utter confusion, the young lord stares in disbelief, wondering what on earth Zuber is doing and why he's giving a farewell speech. Maintaining his theatrical bow while bathed in a purple aura, Zuber formally addresses the court as the representative of the Shahzad family. He then drops a massive bombshell on the room by formally declaring his complete withdrawal from the duel. The sudden forfeit sends shockwaves across the chamber, leaving the surrounding nobles frozen in absolute astonishment. Meanwhile, Lord Joseph's face turns deadly serious, his eyes burning with intense, suppressed rage. Seizing the moment, Endra breaks into a mocking cheer and enthusiastically claps his hands, loudly proclaiming that the duel is officially over. Seeing his opponent's gloating expression, Joseph realizes in disgust that Endra had bought off Zuber to orchestrate this entire spectacle. With a boastful gesture, Endra places a hand over his chest and calls upon everyone present to bear witness. He triumphantly demands that they all acknowledge him as the sole legitimate head of the Heinel family. However, as Endra revels in his presumed victory, Joseph takes a menacing step forward, calmly declaring that nothing is settled. Endra winks condescendingly, reminding Lord Joseph that Alicia's knight surrendered, making the outcome final whether he likes it or not. Shadow falling over his face, Joseph coldly responds that the matter is far from over until he personally decides it is. Flares of brilliant blue magic ignite around him as he firmly announces that House Veizid will never bow to any judgment passed by traitors like them.